All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in on this Saturday night. I have an incredible show tonight. I'm really excited to hear about all the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about space stuff, space elevators, the future of space travel, commercialization of space, and really exciting. I have Michael Laine with me today. Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Hey, y'all. I'm good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And also, I have Peter Garretson. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
And I'm really excited to dig your brains about what both of you are doing. I know, Michael, you have a lot of stuff. You're the CEO of Liftport, right? I
Right.
believe
Yeah.
that's the case.
Yep.
And you have a lot of cool things to show us about the future of space elevators. And I'm really excited. I'm going to bring you both here on the screen. Here we go. So now we're all together. And yeah, I'm really excited. So let's talk about space elevators. I guess that's really, where this begins, right?
That's
Because
where it started.
you thought about this a long time ago. When did you start the company? Was that 2005? Like back in the early aughts, right?
Yeah. So there's more to it. Started working on this as a part of a NASA research team back in 2001, 2, and 3. And then once that project ended, it was called the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts. Once that project ended, that's when Liftport actually came into existence back in '03.
Okay.
And then kept at it, along the way ever since. Well, sometimes we're easier than others, but worked at it ever since. Yeah.
So when I think space elevator, my mind goes to the movie Ad Astra. I don't know how many people out there have seen the movie Ad Astra, but right in the beginning, Brad Pitt's working at the top of a space elevator. It is a space elevator, right? I mean, I'm not exactly sure what it is. What is it?
Sadly, no.
So it's not.
I watched these previews. I'm a big new movie nerd. I go to a lot of movies, and I'm sitting in and watching previews maybe a couple months earlier, and I'm like, "Yay!" Right? I'm all excited about it.
About the space elevator part.
Yeah,
Or
and
the movie.
they show that, right? They show that, and it's very frustratingly misleading because when it's actually in the show, they call it the International Space Telescope antenna, the space antenna, and so it goes up a distance and then it stops, which could absolutely be an elevator if they just said the words, but they actually changed it so it would just be an antenna.
Do you think that they were doing that just to cover their scientific butts in the movie realm for the movie nerds out there that are like, that can't be possible?
Right.
What's going on?
Right.
So that's interesting. So tell us about the space elevator that is realistic, right? Obviously you have, I know you have a lot of cool things to show us as far as what you're actually working on, but tell us like how that came about. How did the whole space elevator come?
So it's crazy, but it's a 100-year-old story. So
really?
First, what is this thing? So imagine you have a ball and a string, and you're spinning it over your head. The string in the middle stays straight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now expand that to an Earth-sized system, right? The Earth is rotating, and you have a counterweight, a satellite, deep out in space with an extraordinarily long, strong string, right? The mechanics of that are the same, and if you have it, the string stays straight, and you can climb that with a robot back and forth into space.
Is there... sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to... My first initial thought is, do we even have a material that's strong enough to withhold that sort of pressure?
No, we don't. We don't.
No.
That's of course the first thing you should ask. So I'm going to show you some stuff.
Sure.
So this is the. Can you see that? Yeah. This is the original rough draft from NASA, right? And so the mandate here was, with credit to my former business partner Edwards here. He did some really good stuff there. The mandate there was, where is the dividing line between fact and fiction, right? So this idea came about from a Russian. He was kind of conceptualizing in a two-room school on a chalkboard, trying to figure out things that we use all the time, like the rocket equation is actually called the Tsiolkovsky equation. This guy, decades before America's Goddard, was figuring out really critical rocketry equations. And he figured out the space elevator. He figured out that there's kind of an equilibrium point and that we could build this thing. So it starts out as a NASA project, and it starts out as a Russian idea. It stays in Russia for a couple years. Another guy, Artsutinov, added to the idea. And then you can't see it, but behind me there's a bunch of books. One of them was Arthur C. Clarke. And he talked to a guy named Jerome Pearson. Jerome Pearson is credited as the American who independently invented the elevator, but that wasn't until the 60s, so it had already been around for a while. Okay. Pearson kind of teaches Clarke about the elevator. Clarke then popularizes it. Fast forward, I'm a high school punk in, I don't know, maybe a sophomore or junior, and I read about this thing, and it's pure fantasy as far as I'm concerned, just pure fantasy. Fast forward 2001, 2, and 3, I get invited by Edwards to be a part of that research team.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it changed everything for me. So I worked on the Earth elevator for a couple years, and then shifted gears to the lunar system, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let me show you something here.
Okay.
So carbon nanotubes are the material that everybody talks about as being kind of the key to the elevator, right? So that there's ultra strong materials are necessary for this thing. So our team went out and we built, furnaces. We were one of the early pioneers in this kind of nanotechnology. Friends of ours made some of the first strings, which is super promising that this thing exists at all. Yeah. But it's also super brittle. It can't actually hold anything. I could pull it apart with my fingers. And then they're starting to impregnate it into various plastics and other materials. So they are getting better at making this stuff, but we don't have the materials yet for an Earth elevator.
Okay. You just mentioned actually that you shifted gears to a lunar elevator. So an Earth elevator is kind of off the table. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not. So it was for a while. I actually want Pete to jump in here because he actually surprised me with some stuff just this afternoon. Right. Pete, you want to just kind of relay some of the stuff that the other Pete and the other Mike had?
Sure. So, I also, have a history that doesn't go back quite as far, but nearly as far. So, circa 2005, I had the amazing privilege of having this job where I was supposed to be the chief futurist and chief technology scout for Headquarters Air Force Long Range Planning. And in that capacity, I had just this tremendously broad latitude to look at things that were 30 to 50 years out in the future. And I became aware of the space elevator and actually had Brad come out and present at the Pentagon. And what that really does is it changes your scale of ambitions, because when you realize that there is a potential infrastructure architecture that could allow lift to be measured in thousands of metric tons as opposed to tons or tens of tons, it radically changes what you think might be possible for humanity in the long term. Yeah. And at the time, the Air Force was doing a fair amount on nanotech and carbon nanotubes. Well, during that time, I also met Peter Swan, who was a former government satellite designer who decided that he thought this was real enough to devote significant energies to. And curiously enough, he and I have been out of contact for a few years, but he and his colleague Michael popped back in, telling me that they think that the Earth space elevator is now, sort of shovel ready to begin a development project, and part of it is based on the fact that although work on individual carbon nanotube tethers that are one-dimensional materials has stalled, there's been some significant breakthroughs in 2D materials, of which the two are crystalline graphene and hexagon boron nitride, apparently. And so this, now, I'd sort of put the space elevator in the, let's wait until the materials come further along, or, maybe that will never happen. But there's this interesting time that maybe, given the two-dimensional sheet materials, it may be now time to take another look at the feasibility of the Earth space elevator.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I backed away from the elevator back maybe 2010, 11 or so, and really focused on the lunar elevator. And really, it's just taken time, right? Things, breakthroughs take time. So I think that the Earth elevator probably isn't quite there yet, but I'm more hopeful than I have been for a while. But it's still something that we can't build today.
Yeah.
So that's why I focus on the moon, because we can build.
So tell us about that then. Let's talk about the lunar elevator then, because it seems like that's actually is viable today, correct?
Right. Yeah, it is.
So
we have the rockets, we have the communications, the energy, and importantly, we have the materials. There's, depending on which expert you ask, there's either 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15 materials. Garretson here just told me about 2 more today. So there are a number of materials that are very, very strong, and certainly strong enough to manage the lunar elevator. But we call it the Goldilocks requirement, right? None of them are just right. Some of them have elongation problems. Some don't handle radiation or ultraviolet. There's creep involved. So there's all these things that, while the strength problem has been solved, there are still some other coding issues that need to get solved. So that's kind of some of the stuff that our team is aiming for. So we talked about the Earth system. It's a centripetal elevator. It's based on the rotation of the Earth. The lunar elevator is different. We call that a gravitational elevator. Okay. So again, here's the Earth, here's the moon. Imagine that there's a gravitational middle, not the physical middle, but the gravitational middle is much closer to the moon, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a rocket from Earth out, thank you, appreciate that, out to that gravitational middle. That gravitational middle is called the Lagrange point. If I move my mouse, can you see that on your screen?
I think I could do it right here. So this
great.
What you're talking about, right? The Lagrange point. Now this is the gravitational middle right here.
Right. Move to the right of that spot, to that tiny, tiny dot right over there. That's the moon, right? And this image is to scale for the objects and the distance, the natural objects, right? Our string for our ribbon, the picogravity lab, all the physical man-made components, the human-made components. Yeah,
that's all of this here.
Not to scale, right?
Right. Okay.
So you get out to the Lagrange point. You drop a string down to the surface of the moon. You sink it in. You stay there. You're going to have to drill in a little bit. It's all done by robotics. Okay. Then you pull that string back towards the Earth through the Lagrange point. And now you've got a counterweight that is just kind of hanging out in the sky.
And it's static.
It's Oh, right. It's very much in motion, but it's gentle motions, right? You've got the Earth a long ways away, gently tugging the system down towards the Earth. And once you have it, again, you have a ladder you can climb back and forth. But the difference between the Earth elevator and the lunar elevator, on the Earth, the hard part is getting out. It's getting up the string, getting out of the gravity well.
Okay. Off of the moon.
Right. On the moon, the hard part is soft landing. Right.
Okay.
We've gone to Mars more easily and more often recently because it has an atmosphere. You can slow down and stop. Landing on the moon is extraordinarily hard, and it's one of the reasons why we haven't gone back in 50 years.
Okay.
So the elevator takes the soft landing component out of the equation. It just makes it a whole lot easier.
It might be worthwhile to ask, like, why would you want either one? You know, what makes it compelling to even think about infrastructure like this when you have something else, you know, like a rocket? And I think the answer is, if you want to do something truly at scale, where you're moving a lot of stuff, to higher orbits like geostationary orbit, then you really want to look at something that's a high mass flow, low marginal cost system. And what might that be? So, one example is this idea of solar power satellites. That again is a very, old idea. But, imagine that, today there's an orbit around the Earth that the orbit time takes exactly the same time, that the Earth is turning. And so if you look up from, if there's one particular place in the sky, the satellite looks like it's fixed, like it's not moving at all, although it's just going the same speed that you're going on the surface. Well, that has that's terrific for communication satellites, but it turns out that, if you take, like a panel of solar array on Earth, which only gets about 20%, good sunlight about, 20%, a fifth of the day, and you move that up to geostationary orbit. Geostationary orbit's actually slightly inclined to the sun, so it's almost never in shadow. It doesn't come behind the Earth like this very often. It's usually on top like this. So, if you put that there, right, it's receiving like 11 times the energy, and you can convert that energy to radio waves and actually beam it down to the Earth, and you can have 24-hour renewable green energy, and that scales to all of global demand, all forecast demand by 2100. If everybody had, the kind of lifestyle that most of us have, 6 times over.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. This just took an amazing turn. So, I mean, we went from talking about this really interesting idea, the lunar space elevator,
right?
And now you just explained to me something incredible. So you're saying that we can have these solar satellites hovering in geosynchronous orbit and that can send energy down. Is this actually viable now? Can we do that?
All right, so let's talk about viability, right? So
okay.
Technically, there are 2 kinds of technical viability, right? One is that it doesn't violate the laws of physics and it can be built. The other is that you know for sure that you have the engineering talent to build it. And the last is that you have that it makes fiscal sense, that you can actually afford it, right? So space solar power violates no laws of physics. It's extremely simple. It's essentially taking, it's taking a photovoltaic solar array and connecting it to something that's a lot like a bunch of Wi-Fi antennas, or very much like a modern electronically scanned radar array.
Okay.
And then it creates a radio beam, and then you have something that is a bunch of dipole antennas on this side that reconverts it. So there's nothing in that is even challenging in terms of physics ideas. But to build this in a way that is efficient for energy means that you're not building something the size of a normal satellite. You're not building something the size of the ISS.
Right.
You're building a satellite that is 7 kilometers across.
Wow.
And its transmitting antenna is 1 kilometer across, right?
Wow.
And it's on the order of 10,000 metric tons. So it pays for itself in terms of energy, even if you were launching it with rockets in an extremely short time, like less than a month, is its energy payback ratio, because it's getting that 24 hours a day. But, the question comes down to launch costs. Now, typically people, when they've run the numbers, have said that launch cost has to be below $500 a kilogram. You're already getting pretty close to that with Falcon Heavy.
Right.
But if Starship does what it does, then you're definitely in the ballpark where, in theory, this could be economical. The problem that you still have to say, okay, I can draw these schematically, but that's kind of like saying, I've built little mud dams, with my kids, and I understand the principle of building a dam, and now it's time to build Hoover Dam.
Yeah.
So, the scale of what we're talking about is entirely different. And if you're going to be building platforms that individually are 10,000 metric tons, and if you're going to provide all of Earth with energy, you're talking about 3,000 of these in geo orbit, then you want a lot of material. And so then you probably don't want to do that with rockets. You probably want to do that with an elevator that's bringing material from Earth, or an elevator that's bringing material from the moon. And past studies have said that you can build 96% of the mass of a solar power satellite, you can get the structural materials from the dirt on the moon.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you just brought up the Starship, and Elon's doing a lot of incredible things. If the Starship ends up being as successful as it seems like it's going to be, don't you think that it'll be able to fly to the moon and land on the moon? If it can handle landing on Earth, wouldn't it be easy to just land on the moon because it has a full automation, being able to right itself and land? I understand the need for an elevator because you have a station where you don't have to deal with landing on the moon.
Right.
I just wanted to question that. Like, is it really going to be necessary if we're going to have ships that can easily fly out of Earth's atmosphere and land on the moon? And then I also want to ask, if these things are 7 kilometers wide, is it going to block the sky out? Are we going to lose some of our visual, stars? I mean, we don't even see the stars in most cities these days, right?
Honestly, what you will have is just like you have with satellites today, where they go through a particular period where they perfectly reflect the sun, and so you'll have a glint.
Yeah.
A downside, well, perhaps an upside, because it might be beautiful to see a string of pearls, very small, faint string of pearls, at a particular time, of the day,
Okay.
when the sun is reflecting off those particular satellites. And just like we, worry about the costs to ground-based astronomy of, like Starlink trains as they go up, that is something that you would have to think about. But you also have to consider the benefit to astronomy, right? So the benefit to astronomy is that you now have an industrial system that can build, in theory, telescopes with apertures that are 7 kilometers across.
Yeah. Good
And
point.
so and you can make use of all those existing, telescopes. So, and you've got the complete transportation system, that built those satellites. And probably most importantly, you've got a revenue stream that can accomplish that. So to give you a sense of, today, our national space budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 billion for NASA, and about 20 billion for all Department of Defense and intelligence. So, 40 billion total. Well, energy today is almost 10% of global GDP, right? So it is in excess of $7 trillion today, and it's expected easily to cross 21 trillion in the next 30 years or so.
Wow.
So, the revenue stream there is huge. And when you hear, the Chinese talking, for instance, about an Earth-Moon economic zone that they're expecting to return annually $10 trillion, and after they've been very clear that their plan is to industrialize the moon to build solar power satellites as a major motivation, you get a sense of like, where is a figure that large? That's like 3 times the entire GDP of India today. How are they calculating that? And part of that probably is their expectation that they're going to be able to capture a major part of global energy supply.
Right. So when you said earlier about how is it even going to be fiscally, I mean, you said there was 3 things, but the third thing really stuck with me. If it's fiscally possible. Now, you just told me 10% of all, basically the globe's GDP is based on energy. If we put up these satellites that take the energy and beam it down, like that's essentially free energy. And that's why Tesla got shut down, because he was beaming out free energy, which this sounds very similar to that. Why would they want that? I mean, meaning the people who
I didn't hear anybody say it was free.
Okay, good point. I mean, when I hear this though, it's you got a Wi-Fi energy system that's beaming down energy. How do you tap into that, and how do you prevent people from tapping into it freely? Because people can hack into Wi-Fi. I'm sure this would be similar, in that sense.
This is my fault for not explaining it clear enough. So
okay.
Unlike a communication satellite that has a very small antenna, and because it's a small antenna, it has a really, really big beam that just sort of squirts out, right? But as the antenna grows, it's more like a headlight that you can shine ever closer and closer and more coherently.
Okay.
So at the scale that we're talking about, where the transmitting antenna is between a 0.5 kilometer and 1 kilometer across, your receiving antenna is sort of between 4 and 10 kilometers across, like an airport in size. And so there's still a physical infrastructure where the beam is going to. Now the beam, because it's electronically steered, could load share or go to different beams, which is brand new for any kind of power utility. Would be absolutely revolutionary, because, for instance, one solar power satellite could serve the East Coast at one part of the day and the West Coast at another part of the day. But nevertheless, they're still going to specific utilities that are then plugging into the grid. It's not wirelessly charging your phone from nowhere.
So it'd be more like a power station, collector connecting directly to it.
Really, the best analogy is like a hydroelectric station, right? A hydroelectric station is also free, but you've spent so much capital costs in setting it up and a little bit of maintenance, that you have to charge. And so, yes, once you've set it through, the energy keeps coming through. And the other beauty is, there are a couple of things that make this extremely environmentally benign. Even better than ground solar. Yes. So, people like ground solar, but in truth, you need, like, if you wanted to do the same thing with just ground solar, you would need 42 times the land area to do it.
Wow.
Because you've got to consider, that, your worst time in winter is going to be like 5 days with no sun. You've got to have, backup storage. You're losing a lot in backup storage. You're only getting energy like, less than, about 20% of the day, and not, and it's different in summer than in winter.
Or maybe snow or damage,
right?
To the mirrors.
And the reconversion efficiency of your receiving antenna, isn't like 25, 30% like a solar cell on the ground. It's like 85% efficient. So the amount of waste heat you're putting into the biosphere is just tiny compared to any other energy source that you could actually have on the planet, which means much lower land impact, basically no cooling water impact. So even if we had fusion, for instance, fusion just boils water. It creates steam.
I know, it's still steam engines, right?
I still have to pull water out of my rivers to cool that.
Right.
It requires none of that, and it doesn't have the negative albedo effect. It's where, if I put the solar panel on Earth, this big black solar panel, absorbs a lot of heat and re-radiates a lot of heat. So, in almost every way, this appears to be better for the environment even than, ground-based solar.
This is amazing.
Imagine, Peter talked about hydroelectric dams. Washington State, where I'm at, most of our power comes from the other side of the state, whether it's nuclear or whether it's hydro. Most of it's, a couple hundred miles away, and then travels over to Seattle where we use most of it. We lose some big percent, 15%, 25%, 35%, depending on who you ask. We lose a lot of the energy that's created at the source and then transmits over all those power lines. So if you could take a receiving antenna and put it, nearer Seattle, Tacoma, in that area, all of a sudden, for the same amount of energy, you actually get like a 15 or 30% boost because you're not losing the losses across the way. And then the other thing where Peter said, it's 40 sometimes more efficient, or 40 sometimes more land required for the same power panel. That assumes that you have available to you the rare earth elements necessary to build the power panel. You've got to bulldoze mountain ranges to get that many or that much rare earth elements that you need necessarily for the solar panels. So there's a huge cost to that. I'm a big believer in solar panels, but at some point, the idea of electrifying everything means you've got to bulldoze mountain ranges to get the materials.
Wow.
And there are other benefits, I started this by talking about the benefits to astronomy. Yeah. Well, just imagine, the space budget that is available just for philanthropy from, an energy company, when your revenues of your space, today they're about 400 billion. Right, so not even half a trillion, right? But if you were a significant part of the global energy grid, you're talking about $7+ trillion.
Capital T,
right? Trillion's 1,000 billion. So you're talking potentially trillions, versus the measly 20 billion we spend on NASA today. So there's no way that America could afford the kind of ambitious space program and space transportation system on public dollars that you could get, in comparison to, if you were to start building energy infrastructure in space. And then you've got to think about, like, what else could you do? Like, if you were ambitious as a society and, like, said, something cool, the pyramid of our time, the cathedral of our time would be to send a probe to another star. Well, one of the early ideas for how to do this is basically you take a solar power satellite and you take that beam and you're pushing a light sail, to relativistic velocity so that you can, send a very small probe. I mean, like a little chip, but nevertheless, the ability to actually, send something human-made, within it, a human lifetime, to go to another star system, that's extremely incredible. And then the other thing is, once you have a system that, because of the industrial learning and the scale of transportation involved in building these revenue-generating platforms, you can now start thinking about these ambitious ideas like space colonies, things that you might want to do for cultural, or survival reasons. It's also something that you could repurpose, for asteroid or planetary defense. And there are even, like, interesting ideas for small package delivery, rapidly back and forth between Earth and Mars. So it just completely opens up all kinds of new freedom of action in space logistics and transportation.
So
before we move on, I just want to ask, you just said a couple really cool things there. How far do you think we are away from these things? Sending a small probe to another star, that alone is really cool. Everything you just said, it's really cool. How far away are we from these?
So you asked a moment ago about, okay, if SpaceX and Blue Origin and there's a whole slew of companies trying to land on the moon, what do you need the elevator for? Go back to that Lagrange point for a second, right? Let's build that place into an orbital industrial facility, not orbital, Lagrange point industrial facility. at that point, you're going to build Garretson's space-based solar power systems. We're going to dig up regolith from the lunar surface. We're going to package it into solar panels. We don't have to bulldoze mountain ranges in Alaska or Canada or Australia. So you're going to take that and you're going to build from this site at this Lagrange point. You're going to build all of these tools that we just described. You're going to build the space-based solar power systems. You're going to build, call it the Enterprise. I know they're going to call it something else, but I'm going to call it.
Why not though? I was a big Star Trek fan. I'm
so
okay with
let's build the Enterprise, and at this industrial site,
okay,
you're going to build these technologies. And to answer your question, where we're going to build at the Lagrange point, we're going to build it off of Earth elevators when we get them, and then when this stuff is happening super fast. Pete and I nerded out before our call about some of the new policies that are coming online. The focus right now is build out low Earth orbit, use the assets there and the streamlined capabilities to expand to the moon. Let's build some assets on the moon and make it easier to go to Mars. And now with the new news this week about Venus, we're definitely going back to Venus. Really.
True. Yeah, very true.
So this technology, it's very near term. There are over 150 launch companies on the books. Now, granted, most of them are going to fail. All right, so take that 150. And even if only 10% of them succeed, that's still suddenly 15 commercial rocket companies that are viable. And I can think of 5 or 6 that are viable right now today, and there's more on the way. So that's your first infrastructure asset is rocketry. And they're going to start, the sun is like coming straight.
I noticed. You're getting beamed by the sun. People in chat were actually saying, "Beam me up." Because you started talking about the Enterprise.
Let me give you a break for a minute. And you asked a question about could Starship land? Well, they actually have a Space Act agreement with NASA to specifically look at making the Starship upper stage being able to land on the moon. And so could it? Probably, Now there are some interesting problems with a lander that heavy that I'm sure they're working through. But if you wanted to do this regularly, what you want to have is landing pads, so you're not constantly kicking up. The larger the vehicle, you can really kick up a lot of dust. And even as reliable and safe as these rockets get, for a number of reasons, you might just prefer, the nice slow ride for yourself for the payload, that an elevator gives you. But you don't probably need that unless you have decided you want to do ambitious things. Now, you asked this second great question, which is how far off is all this? And this is where I really think, your audience has the opportunity to shape this, because these are not questions of technology, right? I can tell you how long the technology will take, or I can give you a pretty good approximation of what the technology, would take. But, this is really a question of national ambition. Of what do we want to be as a people? And whether or not we want to make that a part of, of who we want to be. So, space solar power, right now, pretty exciting. There's a program called SPIDER at Air Force Research Laboratory that's aiming to, test individual components. There are at least 2 companies, Mankin Space and Solarin, and I guess 3, Virtue Solis, that are interested in doing this commercially. That are looking for investment and partnership and government partnerships. In Chinese, there's a program in Japan, and on the Chinese side, there's a very serious program where they plan to test something that's got like a megawatt in space. Like a megawatt, is 1,000 watts, as opposed to the International Space Station that's about 100
Wow.
kilowatts. So
I think
a
you
megawatt is
summed it.
1,000 kilowatts.
Yeah, I think you summed it up right there. I mean, I'm talking about America. American students, American children were asked, what do they want to be when they grow up? And the general consensus was, I want to be a YouTuber.
YouTube star.
I want to be famous. I want to be an influencer. And then when Chinese students were asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a scientist. I want to be an astronaut. And I think that's a big issue. And that's kind of, I mean, I love space. I love talking about this kind of stuff. And the more we talk about it, the more we get people excited about this future is really the key. And now I do have a question.
That's why we're doing this show.
Yeah. And honestly,
we're doing this show.
Let me just say thank you guys both for coming on. This is really amazing stuff. It really does feel like this lunar elevator is way more than just a lunar elevator. It feels like this is a new sort of space base that will be the go-to point to build future ships. That if we can have a station that we can build them in space already, we don't have to use any fuel getting them into space. Right. Yep. We don't have to deal with gravity at all. It's already there in a point that actually is, I guess it's a neutral gravity point, right? Because it's the central, the grain point.
It is
right?
magical in more ways than that, because it isn't just that you are balanced between the Earth and the Moon. It's that from that location you can get to any inclination going around the Earth, which is just magical. And you can use that as a slingshot around. So from the L1 point, your ability to get to other locations that you care about deeper in space, or to deal with a threatening asteroid or comet, just it is a wonderful and powerful place to be. And if you've got an infrastructure that, as you say, can carry the structural materials to build ambitious things like spaceships or space stations, or solar power satellites, or interstellar beamers or interstellar craft, and you've also got propellant. You've got fuel, you've got water that you can turn into hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel, or just hydrogen if you're pursuing nuclear power. And that gets into this question of so you can have space solar power satellites, the beginning of them, right? The beginning of commercial viability, where you'd retire the risk and proven you could do it. You could, if you wanted that as a national policy, you could have that in 10 years. The space elevator, the lunar elevator, probably in less time than that. And as far as sending something to another star, we looked at this, as a synergistic thing with space solar power, and we concluded that if we were ambitious, we could be returning signals from another star by the tricentennial of America.
Wow!
So that sort of, and Breakthrough Starshot, I think, they are planning to try to send a very small star chip, from this huge laser array, like a gigawatt of lasers out of Chile, I want to say sometime in the 2040s, when they think the cost of laser diodes will be low enough. And so they're funding, work on how to make these chip-sized satellites and how to make these laser solar sails that can steer themselves, and how to do the communication. But they're also interested in advanced propulsion and fusion. And what's unfortunate right now is how underinvested America is in advanced propulsion. When I was first at the Pentagon in 2005, there was actually, we were complaining about it at the time, that we thought it was too low. But in both the Department of Energy and in the Air Force at the time, we had advanced propulsion shops that were thinking about really, really advanced propulsion systems. And today, we're in such a sorry state that, our Space Force research lab that works on propulsion barely has enough money to build, incrementally important electric thrusters, like 2 a year. So if America really wants to go for the stars, there's they need to make that a clear priority, in 3 agencies: in the U.S. Space Force, in the Department of Energy, and at NASA.
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, it
One
feels
of-
like if we look back at what got us to get into the space race, Russia, they were making advances and we saw them and got really freaked out, right? And suddenly, and Michael, we were talking about this, and you
yeah.
said within 6 months, right? NASA was formed.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Tell us
so,
about that. Let's talk about it.
so Sputnik launched
Right, Sputnik.
October 4th, 1957. And within, and that was actually a fairly benign experiment, except, America had an OS moment where we realized that if they can launch a basketball-sized satellite to circle the Earth, what else could they send to America? So they really kind of panicked, and that was probably the appropriate response. Yep. And then immediately, just weeks and weeks later, they created DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So a lot of people don't know that DARPA preceded NASA, not by very far, but by a couple of weeks. And the conversation that we're having right now over the internet was a development of DARPA, and so was GPS, right? So the world that we are living in is this convergence of advanced technologies, whether it's from NASA or whether it's from DARPA. The world that we're living in is a freak-out reaction, an appropriate freak-out reaction from when we launched, or when the Soviets launched Sputnik, right? And so we're in this spot where space has always been a policy decision, right? It's we're not in the Star Trek days where we're boldly going to seek out, right? We are definitely in a situation where whomever they are, what they do influences what we do, and that's pretty obvious. One of my professors, Dr. John Loxton at ISU, International Space University, he has written several books about presidents and space, and some of his stuff about how Kennedy had this very inspirational and aspirational vision. The moment that we landed boots on the moon, it was time to focus on Vietnam. I mean, I hate to say it that way. I've very much oversimplified, but the world that we're in, the advanced technologies born out of the Cold War, we're still living. We've won. We've earned a lot from that. Our global standard of living has improved because of
So that's actually why I brought this up, because it feels like we're living this over again. Now, Peter, you actually mentioned not too long ago that China is planning on setting up a moon base, and they're planning on mining the moon and making that a new venture for them. And I know, or at least just from a personal standpoint, I can see that they're trying to have dominance over space. I mean, even in some countries here, not to get too political, I don't really want to do that, but it feels like we're kind of living that over again because they are clearly making that advancement, and it's making people here in America, myself included, go, wait a minute, like if they get out there and they suddenly claim the moon is now, Chinese land, what can we do about that? It seems like we need to be there with them instead of have them be separate from us. I don't know if that means we need to work together or what that means as far as moving forward, but it does feel like it may be we are in the new space race right now. It's happening again.
Well, we are, and I think that your view is not uncommon. I think many Americans share that very common sense view. I mean, what happened, in Sputnik was that when the American people could see that a not friendly power was able to put something over their heads, they had to consider that the that the safety that they'd enjoyed of being free from attack because of two giant oceans, was gone away. So very much like, the wake-up call of 9/11, people suddenly felt vulnerable because they knew that if they could put something into orbit, that they could also drop a nuclear weapon onto their head. And so,
Right.
That galvanized the space race. And really what NASA was doing, was an attempt to moderate, these forces and to sort of show off and get the non-aligned world to agree that our system, was the better system, and vice versa. Well, something similar is happening today. It's less overtly ideological, but essentially, the United States and China are at this point vying for who is going to be ordering the global system and who's going to be the largest power and largest economic power. And there is literally 1 billion times the resources of what's on Earth out in the solar system, and the moon, is that trampoline to everything else. It is the equivalent of Pearl Harbor, for moving further in the Pacific for any kind of trade. It's the equivalent of the Caribbean islands that allowed America to secure the Western Hemisphere from European powers. And in many ways, it's a lot like the Rock of Gibraltar, at the edge of the Mediterranean. So its strategic importance is just incredibly important. And the thing is, Americans have never been comfortable, with their access to markets being at the largesse of other powers. We had really bad initial experiences with the Barbary pirates. So, we had these, merchantmen that had no self-protection. And once Great Britain withdrew their protection because we were independent, the Barbary states, would capture and enslave our folks and steal our stuff. That was like 10% of our national budget that we were paying out in ransom fees for our own citizens. And that's why we actually started the U.S. Navy. So, just being there, having a stabilizing presence, making sure that it's not easy for an actor to have the temptation to prey on what we are trying to do is the soundest way to prevent it, right? And where the United States has dominance, as we have had in air and particularly on the oceans with the U.S. Navy, it's not dominance in a way that we're repressing others. We're the ones keeping the doors open for free trade. We're the ones preventing closed economic empires. And the same is true in space. When you hear people wanting to see American primacy or American advantage, or you hear terms like space superiority or dominance, no one is talking about putting down others or keeping out others. Right. The idea is to make sure that the kind of access that we provide for all listed and non-hostile actors in the maritime domain, that same kind of freedom would exist.
Yeah.
In the space domain.
Well, and then you think go ahead, Michael. You wanted to say something there. Go ahead.
I want to kind of give a shout out to Garretson. For the viewers that don't know him, I've had the pleasure of knowing him for many years. He's a former lieutenant colonel, retired, and he taught the topics that we're talking about right now about strategy and position. He taught that at the Air University master's program and PhD's programs. So, he comes from a position of legitimate authority when he starts talking about these things. And they are really important. Pete, would you mind kind of describing the history and evolution of Space Force, like where it came from? Because you're kind of like you're right on the edge of it, but I really want to encourage you to kind of get in there and talk about where it came from up until now. And again, I want to stress we're not going to get into politics here, but just history and where we are now and where you think we're going like near term.
Sure. Well, first of all, there was a tension from the very beginning of the space race as to who should be doing it. The Air Force and the Navy both had a sort of vibrant programs to try to get satellites in orbit and to do important things in space, predating, and the Army as well, predating NASA. And and elements of those were either ceded or stolen from those services to make up NASA. But the military was never completely happy with that, ceding their traditional peacetime role of exploration and frontier protection. So they kind of got relegated for a while, and the Air Force ended up sort of being the big dog in this, having developed major satellite constellations that supported military power. And in the Cold War, the principal utility of military and intelligence space power was in support of nuclear forces, in spying on the other guy to know what they had. And we had a gentleman's agreement not to mess with each other's satellites. So there was a regime principally of restraint and dissuading anti-satellite weapons between us and the Soviet Union. And that was never completely comfortable either. Both sides flirted with anti-satellite weapons, and during Reagan, we made serious thought about creating a space-based umbrella against nuclear ballistic missiles to provide kind of an absolute level of security against a nuclear strike on a homeland. And then what happened was, with the demise of the Soviet Union, we had this tremendously important network that guided our nuclear weapons, that looked for warning for the other guy's nuclear weapons, that could see what was happening globally, but we didn't really have the same nuclear threat. So, we figured out that we could, reuse that for conventional operations, and you saw, how effective that was in terms of, guiding precision strikes and allowing distant forces to coordinate in the first war in Gulf War I. Well, once we displayed that capability, everybody who had interests different from the United States went to school on how we did it and realized that our satellites were sort of the soft, underbelly that they could attack. That this was low and slow and above them, and so they started developing anti-satellite weapons. And as new powers, sort of came to be, China wanted to test its mettle and showcase that it could, conduct an anti-satellite test, and that made the United States feel extremely uncomfortable because they had not built their satellites to be able to survive those kind of attacks, because that architecture had been built under the assumption that the big guy wouldn't, the other guy wouldn't touch your stuff, you wouldn't touch theirs.
How long ago was that? Just curious. Like, what year was that?
2007 was when the Chinese did their first anti-satellite test, and it really took a long time to sink in that this wasn't a one-off. That they had a committed program, multiple lines of effort to make us vulnerable. And
hey, Pete, yeah. Hang on a second. I want to add something that's really kind of important here. So I don't want to get into orbital dynamics very much, but there is a way that you can hit, if there's a satellite coming around the sky, you can hit it kind of at a low angle or a high angle. And if you hit it at a low angle, and there are responsible actors that have done satellite tests at low angle, then all the debris kind of circles around and drops out of the sky somewhat quickly. If you hit it at a high angle, all the debris goes like this, and then it circles as a cloud that lasts hundreds or thousands of years.
Wow.
And the Chinese are smart enough to know which way is which, and they did it in a way that's very, let's just say very, they are denying a space of the sky because of the way that they did it, by having a very large, long-lasting cloud. And
on
so,
purpose.
I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think it's easy to figure out.
Interesting.
And so there's been four nations that have done anti-satellite tests, and they don't blow up somebody else's satellite. That would be an active war.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Right, they are blowing up their own to kind of test, right? But it is very much a saber-rattling experience. China, Russia, America, and most recently, Pete, it was just like last year that India did it, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's, kind of this, a number of actors are pursuing anti-satellite weapons. I should step back a little bit and say that, people had debated the importance of a separate space force since the first satellite went up.
Yeah.
And, the one time where we were kind of close was actually in 2000, just prior to 2001. Rumsfeld had hosted a commission the commission had thought through a lot of these different, ideas about a space corps or a full space force. There was a U.S. Space Command at the time, which went away for a while and has just come back. And and at the time you had a number of really far-thinking, space officers, people like General Pete Worden, who really had a broad vision and wanted independence. But it didn't work out. 2001 came around. Rumsfeld got distracted, and so that didn't happen. And in fact, there's probably some level of suppression of that independence, in subsequent years. And what happened was that space continued to mature, but it continued to mature primarily in a looking down at the Earth, supporting joint warfighting methodology. And people knew that it was important, but it was considered a support service, and it wasn't really considered under threat until sometime after 2007. Well, as things continued to sort of get worse, you saw this desire to stop thinking about space as a sanctuary and admit to ourselves the reality that the space was going to be contested and that this required different tools and a different organization and certainly more focus. So
an actual treaty to really establish the groundwork of it.
Well,
I guess, right? I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself
well,
here.
We don't have a treaty, right? I mean, so at the same time, right? China and Russia put forth, two different regimes of prevention for an arms race in orbit, PEROS, and the PPWT, which wants to prevent on-orbit weapons. But the problem with those is that there's no verifiable mechanism in their proposal, and that wasn't really the threat. The principal threat was actually from land-based missiles shooting at satellites. And the problem for the United States, and I think many people don't understand this about the specific problem of the United States and international agreements. Once we sign an international agreement and it gets ratified, that is now U.S. law, which means that I can't have some secret backdoor program, to hedge on this. Once I've said that we're not going to do this, it is, you could be prosecuted as a member of the military for doing something, out of step with that treaty. But that's not the same thing that an autocracy has, right? An autocracy can lie to your face, say we're going to do it, and then cheat. And unfortunately, this is exactly what we observed in our prior agreements. So there's a tremendous skepticism based on previous bad behavior that that we would keep our word and the other guy wouldn't keep our word.
Right.
So even though the United States could, in theory, be sympathetic to a mutual restraint system, the fact that previous restraint systems with the other guy has seen cheating, we get behind. And that's really consequential, because if you don't have the ability to retaliate and hurt in kind, then that encourages bad behavior or surprises later on.
Yeah.
Let me jump in for a sec.
Go ahead.
So again, orbital dynamics here for a second. Satellites, we're mostly talking, not entirely, but we're mostly talking low Earth orbit satellites orbit the Earth roughly every 90-ish minutes or so. And it's math, right? So they cycle the Earth very, very regularly, and we know exactly where they are. And anybody else also knows exactly where they are. So they're kind of like in that carnival game where you've got the ducks moving back and forth and you have to shoot them as it goes by. It's the same thing, right? Satellites are very, very soft targets and very predictable by their nature of them. When you look at the global number of satellites, there's something like 3,600 official unclassified satellites. And the United States and our allies control, well, the United States has management of about half of those, and our allies control maybe another 20 or 30 or 40%. So in military terms, that's a really asymmetric situation where damaging, if you just throw out a bag of sand and have that sand drift around low Earth orbit, you can knock out thousands of satellites, and most of them are going to be either American or American ally satellites. So the damage is off balance also.
Well, you say throw out a bag of sand. I mean, that could also be them destroying one of their own satellites in a low angle.
Right.
Or no, I'm sorry, at a high angle, like you said, that will create that dust cloud that, they could claim it's an accident maybe,
right.
And then take out a bunch of satellites.
But the important thing is that they will break one of their own satellites, but they'll break 15 or 20 of our satellites.
Right.
So that's easy math for someone.
Yeah, and this is one of the strongest, arguments that I think, is on the side of, arms control, which is, people in glass houses don't start rock fights.
Yeah.
So, there is always the fear that, by taking a step towards developing our own military, anti-satellite capability or retaliatory capability, that you are encouraging, others to do the same. You're legitimizing it in some way, and so you can make it, worse. But both logics are true. If you let them do it and you fail to do it, there's zero cost to them, and there's zero intent, and there's every incentive for them to do it. And what I think is distinct, there are two considerations that are kind of important, right? And there's an asymmetry between the global ends that the United States has to pursue militarily for foreign policy and what our potential adversaries have to pursue. For the most part, an adversary, be it, for instance, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they are playing locally close to home where they really don't need a satellite infrastructure, for them to reach their military goals. So they are in a position where they could potentially sacrifice it and still do okay. But we who have to, push our forces far forward to defend our allies and our interests, to prevent a closed regional empire, to prevent the coercion of our allies, have to be able to coordinate at very long distances, to see things, to have precision, for that to be, economical and make sense. And so, it is just a terrific Achilles heel at the moment, particularly because it relies on a few satellites that are globally useful, because most of these satellites are in low Earth orbit. They don't just go over one country. They don't support just one area. They're coming over, every part of the world. And so if you lose $1 billion, NRO satellite, that's not just gone for, East Asia, that's gone for Europe and everywhere else. And they know that. And so they want to apply that pain threshold to prevent us from coming to the aid of our allies, or to prevent us from the traditional freedom of movement that we want to have. So, just to come back to the idea of, what is the story of the Space Force? So we might have had one at 2000. We didn't. September 11th distracted us, spent all that time thinking about terrorism. And then, we woke up to the fact, in particular that China was, on the edge of becoming, a peer power, and that, we had to get our head in the game, or we were going, to really lose our position of prominence in a lot of U.S. interests. Well, in that process, space became more important and more vulnerable and a greater focus. And you started seeing people really worry about the pace of, China. So it's one thing to say, our capability is here and it's way better and their capability is here. But the problem is, we're moving at this tiny, slow pace and they're coming up behind us like that. And, so that started to concern folks in Congress that that the Department of Defense wasn't moving fast enough. And in a bipartisan effort, they wanted to separate space out so that it could be directly viewed and managed by the American people, that, people could make sure that the R&D, was going to that. And so they wanted to do that. Somewhere around that time, the president, also became aware that this was a potential position of opportunity. But I think the administration's view, started more broad. And what you saw, around this time in January of 2019, was an acceleration. So that's when Chang'e 4 landed on the South Pole on the far side of the moon.
Right.
And that's really when I think the general public and the politicians woke up to the fact that China is a real capable actor here. And if we, if we didn't get aggressive, they were going to steal the banner of leadership, for the global audience. And they also had the big picture to think about the longer term economic possibilities that space has. So unlike in the first space age, where principally it was about nuclear security and prestige, in the second, it's about actual, geographical, positional advantage for long-term exploitation of economic resources.
Yeah.
And, from in a little over a year, you saw the creation of the Space Force, the articulation of the Moon 2024 and 2028 goals. You saw a brand new deep space exploration and development strategy. You've seen 5 space policy directives, and you've seen an executive order on space nuclear power and an executive order on on space resources.
Wow.
And so just this huge acceleration after Chang'e 4 landed. So that, it is in some ways somewhat analogous, but I think it's a less stark, but still motivated a tremendous amount of, get your head in the game activity. So
what is just for everyone who doesn't know, can you just elaborate on what is it, Chang'e 4 you were saying? And that is China's lunar lander, I believe, right?
Their 4th mission to the moon. It was the one that they actually landed with extremely clever and interesting mission design.
Yep.
So, the Earth and the moon face each other, and the Earth is rotating. The Earth is rotating, and the moon is tidally locked. So one side of it always faces. So from the Earth, you can never see the backside of the moon.
Right.
And you can't do any kind of command and control or receive data from the backside of the moon because the moon is in the way. So if you want to do that, you have to first send a probe all the way to the L2 point in a large halo orbit so that you reflect it and see the backside. And then, you've got to do the very hard job of soft landing that requires, significant computation and mission planning. And they pulled this off, which is something that, we had not done. It's something that we could have done, but it was something we had not done.
Right.
And it also was different in its messaging because, what they chose to do in that, and their messaging surrounding it was very industrial and settlement, right? So they were, in fact, their whole, program chooses to emphasize things that have to do with long-term economic return and the possibility of human settlement. So they had seeds that they tried to sprout, and they had, a rover, that lasted for an incredibly long time in the number of lunar nights.
Did you want to add something, Michael?
Yeah, it's worth looking up the Pete mentioned that they had some seeds, and they took pictures, right? And so the propaganda of that is that China grew, plants on the moon. That's really good propaganda, not technically accurate. They started them down here on the ground. They were viable down here on the ground, launched them. It's only a 3-day trip to the moon. And then when they get there, they take a picture and look we're growing something on the moon. But plants don't grow that fast. They just don't. So super effective propaganda. I was in this really interesting position where I was down at in Colorado Springs at Air Force Space Command. It predates Space Force, and I was down there in a meeting 4 days after they landed. And you got to know that was a part of that conversation, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
What is, truly, what is going on the far side of the moon? And there is no answer to this. If we don't get, if the Chinese don't decide to tell the world what they're doing on the far side of the moon, we literally have no way of knowing that.
That's a good point.
And that's an interesting spot to be in if you think of the mindset and I'll say it, the ego of Americans. We kind of think we know what's going on.
Yeah.
And to have this, the full far side of the moon unavailable to us from our sensors, that's an interesting spot to be in. So it spooked people. It's not as front and center obvious as Sputnik was because there weren't any satellites. Any farmer in Iowa could look up at the sky and watch the thing going over their heads.
Yeah.
You don't have that. It's not visceral. It's not literally in your face by this little robot on the backside of the moon, but it is every bit as significant as Sputnik. And Pete just mentioned almost a dozen new documents, another half a dozen new policies created as a very direct, I believe. I mean, I'm not in DC, but it feels like there's a very direct correlation between this very significant act and the policies that are being created as a result.
So I have to ask this. I mean, we've been occupying space for 20 years in the International Space Station, and China's now putting up their own space station. I don't think they're done with it yet, but I know that they have plans to do so, and they're clearly doing their own stuff. And now looking at the moon, the Lunar Elevator, that seems to be very specific. It has to be in a very specific spot at the, because the moon is tidal locked, right. It'll have to be dead center, right? Yeah. We'll have the counterbalance weight.
Right.
There can only be one, right? Yeah. As far as what I understand about it, if it would need to be a new International Space Station, correct? Now, everything. Well, let me just finish. So everything you're telling me now, it feels like we do have this new sort of space race going on, and there seems to be some trouble brewing because say China doesn't want to get involved, and say they have their own scientists that are working on the same exact kind of project, and they say, look, we are already there and we're already building this. What do you do? I feel like that's something that we may have to deal with.
I mean, absolutely. To call it an International Space Station, I think probably premature.
Okay, good call.
We definitely want partners. I've already mentioned. I'm the Alumni Association president for International Space University's U.S. chapter, and I really do believe that kind of this Star Trek vision of the future is the appropriate path for humanity. And so I do think we're going to have a lot of partners as we develop the moon. The European Space Agency has a pretty strong but as yet unofficial program called the Moon Village Association and the Moon Village. And there's 20, 30, maybe 30 national partners involved, and probably in north of 50 or 70 commercial and academic partners involved with this. So that's already starting to bubble up, and we're starting to see pretty big results from this kind of ad hoc collaboration. And then the United States has got something like 40 missions to the moon scheduled in the next 10 years.
Wow, 40.
And most of that is public-private partnerships between NASA and commercial providers, right? You've already seen SpaceX supply people, but mostly cargo to the International Space Station. They use that model as an example for what a partnership between NASA and American commercial ingenuity can really do. And so all of a sudden I would almost call it a moon rush. Actually, there's a book behind me called Moon Rush that Leonard David, a longtime friend of mine, wrote. It is a moon rush. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's very, very, very certainly being led as an international program. But everybody has different mechanisms, right? It's a chessboard, and different companies, different cultures, different countries are bringing different assets to the table.
But can we, more specifically though, it feels like China is trying to do their own thing, and that it seems fine until the point where it's not anymore, where they go, look, we're building this base here, and we're not going to be party to this. Like, is there plans to bring them on board?
So they're not doing their own thing. They're definitely not.
They're not. Oh, okay.
However, they're not necessarily doing it with us. There are actual laws and rules in Congress that prohibit a lot of actions and activities between America and China. Okay. Where they are partnering is fascinating. They've got this very, very, very strong program called the Belt and Road Program that is basically an infrastructure network across all of Asia, and importantly into Africa. So they have built very strong international collaborations and partnerships with African nations to help co-develop or lead creations of satellites, communication networks. They are actively courting Africa, Europe, and surprisingly recently, Russia has decided that they want to partner with China on some stuff. So those are relatively recent changes in the last 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, 15 months range.
Do you think that has something to do with we are no longer needing to use the Soyuz to get into space anymore now that we have Elon doing his reusable rockets?
So I don't feel like I'm qualified to say why that's happening. I just know that it is happening. I don't know.
Right.
Pete, you want to add anything to that?
Well, look, here's the problem for the United States. We have goals that are in conflict. So on the one hand, we're a democratic country, makes us very nervous to be, either economically supporting by subsidizing, a autocratic systems, paramilitary, organizations, to be dependent on them, or just to be sort of, standing shoulder to shoulder with, people who abuse our allies and abuse, their own people. So, we're never fully comfortable cooperating with countries that don't share our values or antithetical. On the other hand, we have an interest in not having wars with those powers, right? We're not in a position to change that. And, there are useful ways in which, things can be moderated. Sometimes symbolism can be helpful. Sometimes it can help build relationships. Usually it doesn't actually, do anything at the core level. And for a long time, congressmen have been very uncomfortable with the idea that we were dependent on the Russians for access to space for
Yeah.
humans' access to space in the International Space Station, and we're in a more comfortable position. And Russia's position, changed after the invasion of Crimea, where we became more concerned about Russia's actions in the world and less comfortable in general. And China, started similar. On one hand, I think most Americans recognize that China as a civilization is an extremely capable culture and civilization, and that we wouldn't want to exclude them from doing better in the vast benefits. On the other hand, their system is a one party Leninist system, committed to single party rule and control of information, and that results in some pretty difficult issues in terms of suppression and also behavior on their aggressive behavior on their borders.
Yeah.
As well as their theft of our intellectual property and problems with our allies. So on the one hand, yes, it would be nice to moderate conflict and be able to have a non-antithetical relationship for our space goals, but that comes at the cost of the security of our intellectual property, of legitimizing a power that is opposed to us, and so there's a desire not to let the fox inside the hen house. And then the other thing that I think is difficult for Americans to understand, because we wake up with assumptions of basic equality amongst each other. When we get together and shake hands, we just assume that the other is more or less equal. We don't look at each other and say, where are you in the hierarchy and who should bow to who?
Right.
That's not, but that is, part of the historical culture that China is coping with. And our idea of like contracts as these morally binding things, that once we sign up to something, there is this really strong commitment, right? Is different, right? They see things much more conditioned by power. So an agreement is more like an agreement between mafia dons that, when the interests change, it's easier to reinterpret it and say, oh, that's not what I meant. And so you've always got to ask yourself, do you want to be in that position, of Han Solo, with Darth Vader, and he says, I've just altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Yeah, right.
And that's very much what the nations of ASEAN are dealing with, where China made this agreement on the South China Sea that was very specific about what they weren't going to do, and then they turned around exactly and did it. Right after Clinton Obama had gone and asked point blank, are you going to do this? And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And then sure enough, they did. So the optimal solution, of cooperation is fraught with problems if you have a predator or somebody who is observed to cheat. And so that, creates problems for us, and that motivates part of, it goes back to, what is, Space Force and what is it trying to do? Well, there's a huge tension. There's a battle for the soul of the Space Force, because we've got a group of stakeholders who look at it based on what space power does now for you and how it enables the joint force on Earth. And so they principally think about space as an information service to terrestrial warfighting, and they think about the space power and the role of Space Force as making that more secure in protecting military satellites. But I think what the administration had in mind was a much longer term vision, that as we expand outward and as other nations expand outward, we don't want to be in the position, like we were with the Barbary pirates. And so we need an outward-looking space force, not just an outward, of course it has to look down.
Yeah.
An outward-looking space force that's thinking about the development of a space economy, that's developing the tools and tactics and procedures, less, you always have to be prepared for the possibility of war, but really that's not what a space navy, right? It's not trying to do that on a day-to-day basis, right? It's there showing the flag, making sure that others know that if they aggress against you, there's the possibility of retaliation, that it will be costly. And so that ability to be present in the domain, to prevent coercion, to prevent aggression, to enforce the fact that we have agreements, that's one of the principal roles, that many of us that were early advocates of the Space Force, think is essential to get in its early ethos and thinking about itself. And for that, part of that is you have to, as a nation, believe that your private sector, has this ambition. And I'll throw it to Michael to talk about this. But as Space Force comes into being, right, there's this broader societal ambition. You hear it expressed by Elon Musk of being multiplanetary. You hear it, expressed by Jeff Bezos of, moving industrialization, this great inversion where we bring the industrial parts to space and we allow Earth to be zoned light residential, and we enable this expansion and this ability to harness vast new energy sources. And I should mention that's huge uplift for the world. Like if you built the ring of solar power satellites that I mentioned, right, 15 terawatts of electric energy grows the global GDP tenfold, right? The world would be tenfold richer if you built that infrastructure.
Right. Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great. And you don't have to worry about any of the environmental downsides.
Well, and then think about, right, that I've named our company Liftport for a reason, right? The lift is obvious, climbing back and forth, but it's a port, right? And so think about all the applications of the Navy. They maintain ports, they maintain communications, they maintain commerce between ports. And so if we start building this mammoth infrastructure, hundreds of companies, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going to space soon, and you asked about timeframes, we're probably going to have point-to-point suborbital rocketry maybe in the next 2 years, 3 years. The first tourists are going to launch in probably 6 months. You've got a dozen U.S. companies that are probably on the near horizon. You've got reusable rocketry as a new technology that's really transformed everything. There's 6 U.S. companies that can do that now, but there's multiple other nations and other countries that are working and actively succeeding in reusable rocketry, right? So that's not going to be, we have the we have the advanced technology right now, but it's being copycatted all over the world right now. So there's suddenly going to be, and I would bet pretty solidly that within the next 5 years, it wouldn't surprise me if we had 100 or 1,000 people living and working and playing in space in just 5 years. And if you count day trip astronauts that are taking point-to-point suborbital, that number is going to be way, way, way higher. Yeah. So, I mean, it's right there in front of us. And so you need some sort of defensive, protectionary force. I'm a former U.S. Marine. I really wanted it to be called Space Corps. I really think it should still be renamed as Space Corps. But whether it's Corps, Guard, or Force, each of those words have meaning. But at the end of the day, they all come down to making sure that the rules that we have globally agreed upon are being met and managed and maintained. That there's a lot of people that are going to be at stake up there. There's a lot of money in terms of services, and there's a lot of money in terms of hardware and infrastructure. So it is appropriate that we start building out these systems.
Wow. So Liftport really is, it isn't just this lunar elevator. It really is the future spaceport, that is going to be the gateway to the solar system. Really, if you look into the future far enough, that's where we'll be building our future spaceships. That's where we'll be, we'll go there from Earth to then go to Mars, to then go out to Venus. It's very exciting stuff, actually.
I think you're going to wind up in a situation. Super boring stuff. Look up delta V. It's a measure of energy to get from point A to point B wherever you want in the solar system. If you start at a nearly null gravity point at the Lagrange point, it's 0.14 to get anywhere else in the solar system. And to put that in perspective, to get off the Earth to low Earth orbit or geosynchronous orbit, it's 9, it's 14, it's 13. So it's hard getting out of the gravity level. But once you're out of it, it's 0.14, so almost energetically free to get anywhere else in the solar system. And I got a friend of mine, Pete and I both know him, Dr. Adams, who is working on some nuclear fission ideas.
You're telling me about this.
Ideas.
Yeah.
He's looking at Mars. With a fully fueled system, you could get to Mars in 37 days, which is
that from the spaceport though, or lift port?
So
or from Earth, like from the ground.
So there's some choices there that I'm not really qualified to answer, but
okay.
But you've got options. You've got choices, right? If you can go very, very fast and you start from almost a null gravity point, it makes going anywhere you want to go much, much faster.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So listen, we don't have too much time. Usually around now I get into some super chats, and we do have a bunch of super chats I'd like to get into. But Michael, I know that you have a few things that you might have wanted to show people. Do you want to bring anything up that maybe we didn't get to yet, or you'd like to go over?
We talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about, maybe not with pictures, but I think I'm just gonna skip those images and I'll bring them up next.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So this has been fantastic. Seriously, thank you, Peter and Michael, both of you, for joining me today. And I hope everyone has learned a lot about this. I'm super excited about the future of space. Seems like there's a lot more that people are talking about that the general public, at least I, don't know about. And I feel like we need to get this out there because the future is definitely space. We are absolutely moving towards getting into becoming a space-faring civilization. And the sooner we get people excited about it, the sooner we're going to make it happen, essentially, because no one's excited about it. So we're not making this, movement towards it.
Yeah.
So if we can get towards that and really, make it happen, let's do it. I'm really excited about it. So I'm just going to read some of these here super chats that people have been sending our way. Let's see. This is from Ben Ritter. Said, I want to send you a copy of Election Year Knockout because I think it'll make you laugh. Okay, so this is just this isn't privy to what we were talking about, but Ben, you can send it to my email, adamcastirl@gmail.com. Thank you. The Feasing Ton says, space elevator, what an interesting topic. It's nice to focus on things that could unite the world. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Exactly as we were talking about. This really does feel like something that can unite us. And I'm not sure which one of you mentioned this earlier, but it stuck in my mind. Most people don't want to go to war. I think that's true. I really feel most people want good for others.
Right.
And as long as we figure that out and make people realize that that's how most people are, it's going to be a lot easier moving forward. So we definitely need to unite. Byron Bank says these concepts.
I want to tell a story for a second. So.
Oh, sure.
So we've got this. I keep referring to kind of a Star Trek vision of the future because I'm a big nerd.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a lot about conflict, right? But I want to point out that space has been used many times to unite in powerful ways, right? During the Vietnam days, where the tensions between the Soviets and the Americans were really, really rough, we decided to go have a handshake in space where the Apollo program and the Soyuz program went into the sky and we literally shook hands, right? That's using science and space to connect. And it was the beginning of important détente between our two cultures, right? And then fast forward, the Soviet Union collapses in the end of the 80s, and we use the space program again to prop up what had been historically a 50-year adversary. We're like, look, you guys are having some bad days. Why don't you help us with this International Space Station thing? Let's work together on sending some astronauts to the sky. And when our systems broke, when our space shuttles broke, or when we ended that program, we relied on allies that we would not have had we not gone to the sky in partnerships. So, you're absolutely right. Like, nobody wants to have war on the ground, let alone a shooting war in the sky. So, let's use it as a binding tool for a hope, not for scary, dark futures, right?
Yeah, I love that. That. This is from Byron Banks. These concepts were present in the original Gundam universe Century. Highly recommend watching the 0080 War Pocket for a 3-hour miniseries on it. I don't know about this. Do you guys watch Gundam at all?
I'm a total Gundam fan.
Are you?
I was growing up in Japan when it was when I couldn't even understand the English, and it was live in the original series.
Oh, cool.
And, it definitely altered my thinking, and gave really what I will say is that unless your audience has actively gone looking for it, the chance that they have seen an O'Neill colony, as it was depicted in Gundam, is low.
Oh, yeah.
So, Gundam, of course, was based upon the world of Gerald O'Neill, who wrote The High Frontier and 2080, which is just the really, really fantastic, real world physics thinking. Of course, they took it some different directions, by, imagining giant robots. But there's actually a really good depiction of the physics and, what these vast, and we're talking about like the size of New York City scale, islands in the sky where they rotate and create artificial gravity and have, natural landscapes inside. And of course, all that is built with materials from the moon or asteroid. And the really astounding thing, that they reflect, which was part of O'Neill's original studies and vision, is that just in the Lagrange points, if you built these there using lunar materials and using like less than 1% of lunar materials, you could have a larger population than the population that Earth could support.
Yeah.
Is this now that same person actually sent me this? Is this it?
Yeah.
That is an example of what it might look like inside. They're beautiful images you can find.
Yeah.
What you're looking at here is you're inside this cylinder. You've got these huge panes of glass. At the very top, you actually can see a mirror that's projecting out from the back end of the satellite, pointing at the sun, reflecting the sunlight back in. And if you were to look up at the top, right, at the other green, you would literally see little people standing upside down compared to you.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
You see, yes, somebody mentioned that you do see something like that in Interstellar, and you do see something like that in The Expanse. And I would actually say that The Expanse is a completely, with the exception, of the Stargate that just arrives.
Right.
The human technology is completely something that we could have within that time frame or sooner.
Yeah.
Man, what an excellent show too, The Expanse.
Yeah.
So you two, you've seen The Expanse, both of you?
So
yeah, go ahead. What do you got to say on it? I love that show.
I was going to have one other piece about Gundam, because the International Space Elevator Consortium, ISEC.org, has been kind of the keepers of the flame for the Earth elevator for a long time.
Okay.
And the Japanese Space Elevator Association is actually substantially higher in terms of population. There's more people in JSCA than ISEC, and I really credit Gundam for the pop culture interest in the space elevator in Japan.
Awesome.
And they have a plan to build an elevator, an Earth elevator by, so the numbers have changed. I've heard 2060, 2050, and 2040. And whatever number Japan throws out, China cuts it by 5. So whatever the most recent Japanese number is, China's like, okay, we'll beat you in 5. So But Gundam has popularized it in Japan in a way that we never saw in the United States.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, so let's see. So thank you, Byron. That was that's fun.
Yeah.
Christian Robertson says, "Dude, this is why I love your podcast. You really look into stuff and get the people you need to know more. I bet this sort of thing is something big. I love the beginning. I love being in the beginning of it. Well, thank you very much. That's exactly what I want. I want to bring light to really amazing, interesting things for our future, because I want to get people excited about it. I mean, you think about what we just saw about this interior of a colony. This could be the future. Like, if we really got that excited about it and started getting our kids excited about living in space and creating colonies in space, we can make that a thing. Like, let's do that. Let's get people excited.
I mean, this is the thing that I think is most Americans, the most ambitious thing that they can conceive of is, in their space program, is that we would land like 2 or 3 people on Mars and did it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
This is such a paltry scale of ambition, right?
I know, right?
I think that we could have billions or trillions of human beings living in these space colonies, that we could have interstellar travel, that we can have the kind of coming and going with spacecraft that the Expanse, presents, that we could have space elevators, that we could have, giant solar power satellites, that provide basically infinite green energy for development, and that we could be richer as a civilization.
Yes.
Like nobody on planet Earth had to starve or burn cow dung. It's just a beautiful green garden planet.
What a beautiful world.
Lots of little green garden planets out there, right? This is totally within our ability to do. And it's just, and I guess one of the things
that's the thing, it's not science fiction. It's not, Neil was talking about, he was like, it's way out there. And here's what's going to happen in 15 years. 15 years, it's 2020. Here's what's going to happen in the next 5 years. We're going to have this huge expanse of rocketry. Rocketry is going to allow us, reusable rocketry is going to put up 100,000 satellites in the sky. With those 100,000 satellites, we are going to connect. There's only 3.5 billion people that have access to what we take for granted, right? 24-hour electricity and internet, right?
Yep.
I joke and call it Skynet. This Skynet system that's being built is gonna stitch the other 3.5 billion people. We call that the rising. The rising.
Are you talking about Starlink right now?
Yeah, I'm talking about Starlink and Kuiper, and there are several. There's there's like 4 mega constellations, all with 20 to 30,000, and these are approved systems, right? This is like, you should go outside and look at the night sky, because it's never going to be the same again. So that's in 5 years, right? In 5 years, we are going to connect global humanity to the internet. Like, that's happening. Then 5 years after, and so we've got reusable rocketry. We're going to get, we're going to have Earth observation at a level that we've never imagined before, and we're going to have communications at a level that we've never really understood. It's going to change everything. So that's like 5 years out. After that, then you're going to have orbital structures, right? You're going to have space stations with dozens or hundreds of people, private company astronauts at low Earth orbit, ultra low orbit, MEO, GEO, the Lagrange point. You're going to have hundreds of people at the same time, right? Right now, I think we have 6 people on orbit, and that's an amazing feat, but it's really, as Pete said, it's kind of like limited thinking, right? With all of these space stations, that allows new technology, new developments, right? So then you start building, we're going to wind up on the moon again in 2024.
Artemis project, right?
Right. There's several Artemis plans. I'm a little skeptical of the date, but I'm going to stick by 2025. Okay. And so there's going to be 5 years where we really actively go to the moon. By the end of this decade, before this decade is out, Kennedy's famous phrase, we will have had 95 missions to the moon. There's about 40 of them that are strictly American missions, but globally, there are 11 other nations all working on missions to the moon, right? So there's a total of 95 missions scheduled to the moon before this decade is out. So the moon's going to be just this beehive of activity very, very soon. And then that leads us to getting out to Mars, getting out to Venus, getting out to the asteroids. Asteroid mining becomes a real practical possibility. And all of this is very stepwise. It seems like science fiction. I got a ton of science fiction behind me, but we're actually living it. Garretson and I and a bunch of our friends, we're actually designing, building, and constructing these systems. And it's hundreds of companies. Silicon Valley is, I saw a statistic, I can't verify, but I saw a statistic recently that there are 3,500 space companies around the globe that have verified $19 billion in capital investment, right? That's what we're looking at. So like, it's interesting that we talk about China as being spooky, but what I think is really going to happen is global capitalism that's a heck of a lot of money, right? That's a lot of brain cells everybody's working on their own piece of the problem, right? My elevator is a piece of it, but it's going to be a footnote in history as we build this O'Neillian future or this Expansian future or this Muskian future or whichever program ultimately winds up winning. Yeah. That's a lot of brain cells. It's a lot of capital. It's a lot of really dedicated, passionate folks. So it's going to get bumpy for sure. I'm sure. But it's so close. It's so gratifyingly close. Like, guys like Pete and I, we've been at for a long time. So 20 years ago, this conversation would have been flat out science fiction. But now we can point to people building things.
Of course, what I would say is that, in many ways, there's a cooperative element even in competition, right? Because you've essentially agreed on a goal. You've agreed that there's a common thing that you're striving for. What's super exciting is that this year, with the release of the new White House Deep Space Exploration and Development Strategy, they actually changed the language, right? For decades, we have limited the discussion to space in terms of exploration. And finally, we're using two different words: development, economic development, and industrialization, right? And that builds an entirely different suite of concepts that's possible for infrastructure, for wealth return on investment. So I really, there's a lot of credit to be given for changing that. And, Michael didn't mention, biotech. The other thing that's coming in this last year, we've seen the first on-orbit servicing of, a robot, satellite going up to another satellite and actually hooking on and providing a service. And you've got at least two companies, and
that's actually happening.
Momentum that are working on like 3D printing structures, at scale in space. The artwork of that is just amazing. People can look up Spider Fab or
that's cool.
So we're going to be able to break away. Today, if I want to build something in space, I've got to make sure that it can survive this incredible vibration and G loads. And then I've got to be able to bunch it into this narrow little shroud. And then, at the end, when the shroud goes away, I've got to be able to deploy it in its solar panels, right? Well, once I can do 3D printing on orbit, I don't need to do any of that. I just send the material up, and the thing in microgravity prints the structure that doesn't need to survive any of that and can be as big as it wants to be. Instead of being, a 6 or 7 meter fairing, you're talking about something that's 100 meters, 7 kilometers across.
Well, that's going to make building those 7 kilometer long, energy solar panel, things, and that actually, this is perfect for this. This is from Citizen. It says, what if you spend trillions of dollars putting this in orbit only to have it fried by a solar flare or CME? Is that a coronal mass ejection?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, so we almost just answered that, because it's not going to, it's going to be significantly cheaper if we can actually 3D print all this stuff out there. I don't know if we'll be able to 3D print the actual panels themselves, but who knows? I mean, can we do that? I'm not even sure.
So there's a company called Lunar Resources that is working on this micro spray deposition to be able to manufacture photovoltaic cells in situ in space or on the moon. And that's not the only way. Like, for instance, there are architectures of solar power satellites that don't rely on photovoltaics at all. They rely on solar thermal, where you're collecting the sunlight and then putting it through a rotating machinery heat engine to create the power. And those would be very robust. But even with I've asked this question before, and coronal mass ejections are definitely something that you want to design in and be able to shut your stuff off. And this brings up another thing, right, that is doing, which is long-term environmental intelligence.
Yep.
Right? You want to have a constellation of satellites that have constant staring custody, of what the sun's doing and of what all the asteroids and long-period comets are doing, so that there is no threat to civilization, or even, as small as a U.S. city, a 30-meter asteroid, would wreak havoc, and a 50-meter asteroid would destroy something the size of L.A. or Washington, D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you've got all this infrastructure, then of course you're going to safeguard it, right? So you're going to have outposts, you're going to have I'll call them listening posts, all around the inner solar system, right? So you're going to pay attention to the sun, and you're going to get early warning, so you shut all the systems down. But it's also super important to think about this planetary protection idea of watching the sky for these big dumb rocks, right? So if you've got infrastructure that's capable of building elevators on the moon, or elevators on the Earth, or elevators on Mars, you've got that infrastructure happening, and you've also got infrastructure capable of developing space-based solar power networks, well, then you definitely have infrastructure capable of monitoring our mother sun when she's having a bad day, right? Yeah. So that technology is almost a self-solving problem because you already have done the other work.
I also say, look, any infrastructure you build anywhere is always going to be subject to some kind of damage or disaster.
Good point.
But the beauty of building infrastructure is that once it's built, it's easier to repair subsequent damage, right? Like if there was a problem with the Panama Canal today, the fact that you had a Panama Canal means that there's all this global shipping, that there's this ability to come back, that there's additional, financial instruments available. So, you could imagine, any type of infrastructure is vulnerable to something: earthquakes, tsunamis, supervolcanoes, or enemy action for that matter.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring up the Panama Canal, because recently, I think it was last year, where China actually was looking to build their own competitive canal so that they didn't have to pay to use the canal. Now, I'm only bringing that up because we were talking about the, kind of the tension between, I guess, the United States and China. And then you think about the future of space travel and what that's going to lead us. I think that's really interesting.
So I want to point out something that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. People are worried, and I was saying this about, a race is a form of cooperation. Really exciting that for the long time, it was only China that had articulated a space industrial goal and a space industrial goal for the moon. And with this deep space strategy that just came out, I think within the last month or so, finally we have officially entered the game, right? Yeah. And so although you may not see cooperative projects, this is going to be so good for humanity in general, right? I mean, if you think about the fact that China got serious about the moon has meant that the U.S. got serious about the moon, and from having basically, a trickle of missions to space, we now have this gold rush. And as that competition intensifies, right, we're going to try harder, they're going to try harder, just like in the Olympics. It's going to bring us both to the best of our abilities. And that's going to be fantastic for humanity as a whole.
Yes,
is.
We're finally going to be getting out there, right? Because the stakes are so high, neither side can afford to relax, and cooperation might do that and moderate it, right? But think about how negative, that can be as well. So had we not signed the Outer Space Treaty that said nobody can own the moon proper, our position has always been that you could remove things from the moon, but you can't own the moon. But had we not negotiated that out of fear that we might not be the first to the moon, you would have seen a continual race at the time, over the same reasons. And so
I gotta bring up though, you did mention President Obama at the time asked them, what are you gonna do with the South China Sea? Are we cool? Are you gonna try to take it over? No, we're not. We signed a treaty, and then all of a sudden now they're claiming it's their property. You can't go to the South China Sea anymore. Who's to say that they're not going to suddenly go?
But the United States Navy has driven right through that. So just for clarity, the United States Navy is like, yeah, interesting that you think that, but and we're just driving straight through.
Yeah. So people like me who I'm a defense thinker, so I think about that a lot, and I think that you have to be concerned about that because of the stakes are so high. Right now today, and maybe for the next 10 years, this is it's peanuts in terms of what it means. But when you consider what it means in the long term, I'll give you an example, right? So in the New World, not too far, from where I live on the East Coast, in the northern part of Florida, or a little above Florida, what you had the Spanish Empire, had basically staked out this territory as theirs. And France said, no way, we want a piece of the action. So they attempted to try and start, a French colony on the East Coast. Well, we're talking about, these are major nation states with very, very large armies, right? But what could they field at distance? Almost nothing. A couple hundred people took, part in a battle that basically decided, the major power in that part of North America for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so, while, first of all, the best chance we can have of maintaining the Outer Space Treaty and maintaining, peaceful relations is to be stronger and to be there, with our commitment to the rule of law and, the principles that we believe it enshrined in our Constitution. That's the securest, future for a free humanity where everybody wins. But you can't know what will happen, and at that distance, the tiniest little difference in logistics, can parry and make it so difficult to come back or to reestablish presence.
Yeah.
So, while the moon, is worth, nothing in terms of return on investment today, I guess what I would say here, many people will say, look, this is so far in the future, it's more than 10 years, it's maybe, 30 years, maybe more than that. Why worry about that when there are so many problems that are right here today? And what I try to explain is anybody who has had to save for their kids' college or their retirement, right? There are things called compound interest that matter over time, right? And it isn't that you have to spend a lot of your income when you're young, in your 20s or 30s, to be a millionaire, in your 50s or 60s, but you got to start putting something away. And if you say, and there's such a difference, right? Like renting or owning. No matter where you live, you're going to have to do a lot of things: take out the trash, sweep, vacuum, right? Yeah. Doesn't matter if you rent or buy. But if you do that for 30 years in a house that you're renting, at the end of that 30 years, you've still got nothing except the bill.
True.
If you do that, on a mortgage, at the end of 30 years, you own that house. And so, space in this case, particularly the moon, is a long-term investment. And it's important that you start your down payments now. Those won't come due for a while, but just like 1 year of waiting to start investing can literally mean hundreds of thousands of dollars 30 years from now. The failure of us from a policy investment to pay attention to this now could make all the difference for, people who are kids today.
Well, that's even more reason why we need to get into the future. I really want to get through some of these super chats. We still got a bunch more to go through. So this is from Jonathan, who said, regarding the Lunar Earth Elevator, how could you possibly get around the constant threat of an asteroid or an object hitting it, causing a chain reaction that could quite literally move the moon?
Okay, first of all, it can't move the moon.
No?
No. The moon is really, really big.
Yeah. Okay.
Africa, it's like Africa big. It's really big.
Hit by really big asteroids all the time. That's what all those craters are.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So we're good. We're good there. So there's no worries there. But absolutely, this thread is very, very thin. On the lunar side, it's very, very thin, and it could break. It could break from a couple different reasons. Obviously, we're going to try to design around it breaking, but if it did, it's kind of going to be a really bad day. You shouldn't be on this elevator. You'll probably die. If you're actually traversing, there's probably nothing we can do about that. But it's actually okay if it breaks. It will be a very bad day, and I will be very angry. But what will happen is, so you've got that counterweight, right? And you've got the Lagrange point. The Lagrange point station
will just stay, right?
Yeah, because it's in kind of a null gravity, it's going to shift, right? The moon moves a little bit, so it's going to wobble, and we are going to have to put some energy into it to stabilize it, right? So the moon's on one side, Earth's on the other. We are going to have to stabilize it, and that's going to take some work. That's not trivial, and I don't want to sound like I'm oversimplifying it, because it's very complicated.
And that's actually you're saying even if everything's intact, that's going to have to happen. Right,
because we need the counterweight to balance us, right? The counterweight keeps the whole thing tight. So if the string breaks, whether it's above the Lagrange station or below, the counterweight is now going to fly back towards Earth, and we're kind of a bunch of smartasses on our team, and we refer to that as the dagger to the heart problem.
Okay.
The counterweight is being held by Earth's gravity, therefore it's going to have this counterweight trying to go and
go back to Earth.
Yeah, that would be a really bad day, right? It's many tons, but it's not like a really big asteroid, right?
But
so
could it actually do damage though? I mean, would it burn up in the atmosphere, or
right?
If
we did nothing, it will hit, and it'll hit hard. Mostly it will hit in the ocean, because the Earth is mostly ocean. And so that's probably the end of the story. If it hit on the ground, it's going to have a big, big bump. But
seems like it could be a problem, though.
You can you can put rocketry into the counterweight, swing it around the Earth
to burn up.
Right back to gently reconnect at the Lagrange point.
Oh, and reuse it. Okay.
Drop some more string and redeploy it. And that's, depending on which scenario we look at, that's about a week. It's about 15 days. It's about 30 days. I actually like the 33-day solution. It puts less strain on everything. It does endanger the Lagrange point station for a longer period of time. But ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. So absolutely good, important question to ask. We think we've got a pretty good handle on it. And because we call it, because we call it the dagger to the heart problem, we're not taking we're taking that very seriously. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it. Yeah. So Black Magic says, if we landed on the moon, why does the gravity affect the astronauts more like a Hollywood set than the 6 times less gravity it should? Interesting question, gentlemen. I guess they're asking if we really did go. I mean, is that what you're alluding to, Black Magic? I'm not really sure. Who knows? I don't know.
I'm gonna go on the record and say we went. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'll go with that. Let's just keep moving. Black Magic says, please jam tonight, please. No, this is rather science episode. I know I have my guitar with me always, and I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. I want to get through these questions because this has been such a fascinating episode. So I don't think music is the right tone tonight. So Randy says, another great show, MAGA 2020, ACB. Well, thank you, Randy. Appreciate your super chat. DJ says, I want to know if we'll ever have an O'Neill cylinder space colonies and how long we can expect to wait for the first one to be built. So that's actually what we went over earlier, right? That's the image I brought forward. So what do you guys think? How long do you think it's going to take until we get to have one?
So something that we should know by now, we really should know if people can have babies in space.
Interesting.
We don't actually know the answer to that. We're pretty sure, but every time I know of 2 different missions, one that was designed by some folks in Australia, another one locally here at University of Washington, where they wanted to send mice up, pregnant mice, and to see how that worked. And they were going to have a artificial gravity, a centrifugal gravity simulant station for these little mice. And pretty obvious question, like we really need to know the answer. And so until we have answered that simple basic thing, can people have babies in space? The idea of having an O'Neill cylinder is still pretty far out there. We have a lot of infrastructure that we have to build. When I gave you that 2035 deadline, there's no O'Neill cylinders in those deadline. But there are, Pete, how many commercial space stations are you aware of? I can think of about 4 or 5. Axios is the biggest one right now. Bigelow is maybe out of business, certainly reduced their business. There's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 others, right? So there are commercial space stations, but none of them that I know of are using any sort of spin.
No, it's unfortunate that we don't see more aggressive testing, specifically for settlement. But really, this is the first time we've had a national strategy that even mentioned the word settlement. So, that will shift things in a positive way. That now that appears to be part of what sane people are allowed to talk about. I think you're not likely to see something significant like a space colony tried before somewhere like 2050. But you could be surprised because, for example,
advancements.
So, it's very specific kind of, advancements. So, there are people working hard on building robots, on 3D printers that can build other 3D printers and doing that sort of thing on the moon. And so if you can get exponential scaling, what you can do and collect and process on the moon could potentially go much, much faster, because the energy is free. You don't have to worry about rust. You have to worry about dust. And Michael's right that you'd have to build space elevators or some other kind of high throughput, like a rail gun. It's really easy to launch off the moon with just electricity. And there are designs for how you would catch that, how you would separate that, how you would move that. And certainly we know that that's sort of the ideological commitment of Jeff Bezos. What he shows in his vision of the future. He wants to enable the initial transportation architecture that allows you to establish the industrial base for that. But that is such an advance. If you think a solar power satellite is big, and O'Neill colony is much, much more massive than that, and you've got to shield it.
Radiation.
But that's what excites me.
Well,
I know.
There's a wild card here. So Pete's 100% right. I'm going to reserve a little bit of skepticism on this, but there is a wild card that I thought of after I answered a second ago. There's a group called Asgardia that is.
I follow them on Twitter. Very cool group.
Backed by a billionaire, Russia oligarch guy. But they've got something like 400,000 people in their supposed country. They have declared that they are a separate sovereign nation. They are going to be the first separate sovereign nation in space. And honestly, if you harness 400,000 people and their brain cells and their collective will, and importantly, their collective checkbooks, I'm going to maintain. I'm going to say that I'm skeptical, but I'm not going to say zero, right? It might be a low probability, but it's not zero.
Yeah, and there are interesting ways in which that could happen, right? I mean, you could imagine that, Asgardia might, build a space station, and it might say, hey, I built this.
Right.
This is sovereign territory. I have a population. I have a territory, and, I am a sovereign state, and, come host your finances here beyond Earth. Do your Bitcoin processing here. Keep your do things that you would normally find difficult in in our tax haven state, and so they might be able to suddenly generate disproportional income, and you never know how that or almost everybody who is involved in space today is not a pure capitalist. They all have some kind of ideological commitment to spacefare, and and that's what makes companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX and Liftport so exciting, right? Is that they have really this very exciting vision of how different and positive the future could be.
Yeah.
And, that I think that kind of a massive future, massive possibilities for humanity, is much more exciting than just 2 or 3 people, visiting someplace new once.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
There was about 15, maybe 20 years ago, there was a group, very aggressive group called Space Island Group or Space Island One or something like that. And what they had imagined was taking the spent boosters of the space shuttle and linking them together, almost like it looked like a bunch of sausage links, right?
Okay.
And they were going to use the space shuttle spent boosters, right? And it wasn't going to be in a Neil colony the way your super chat guest just asked about, but a looped group of very large independent cylinders connected. If you took that and you took that same model and applied it to some of the spacecraft that SpaceX is creating, that model becomes way bigger, right? So there are some wild cards. There are some wild cards that lead us to an O'Neill cylinder, but O'Neill cylinder is still very far away technologically. So there are steps.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So Ground Floor says, great topic, Adam. I am a member of the Moon Society, and I'm a friend of Peter Koch, who has been writing a newsletter called the Moon Miners Manifesto.
Moon Miners Manifesto. Great, great resource.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Thank you, Ground Floor. Awesome. Sounds good. DJ Ronnie says, Prince Zizor's Skyhook. Do you guys know about this? I don't know. I don't know about that.
So I don't know specifically about that, but the general category, of a skyhook is a partial space elevator that doesn't come all the way down to the ground, and you've got both, sort of static ones that that you launch suborbitally to the bottom and then crawl your way up, and then you've got rotating ones that you match speed, and then it can also sling you. So those have been studied by the NASA Institute of Advanced Concepts, and tethers just in general are really interesting. And Michael, maybe I can get him to talk a little bit about, there's ideas for tethers on Mars, and basically you can go all the way from Earth to Mars and back for very little energy if you have tether infrastructure all the way.
Right on.
If you imagine that ball and the string that we talked about before, if you let go of that string, the ball is going to fly across the room, right? Right, yeah. So that energy, you're stealing a super tiny bit of the Earth's rotation, and you're taking that energy and you're flinging yourself out to Mars. And then you have the same system, slightly different, flinging yourself back to Earth from Mars. And in the middle, you can stop off at the Lagrange point station to transfer stuff. But back to the Skyhook for a second. So Pete's right. We did look at that pretty carefully. I think it was after the NIAC report was completed. I think Liftport looked at independent NIAC, although it's been a long time. I'm not sure of that. So Skyhooks are really cool. But here's the thing. Whether it's a rotating version or whether it's a stable one, they cost about the same as a single all the way connected Earth elevator. The pricing is very, very similar. The technology requirements are lower, so that's true. But at the end, that you can use the first elevator to build the second one and split them, and then you build two more and split them. By the economies of scale of building the first, second, third, fourth elevator, it makes it's economically more valuable than building the single use skyhook. So the technology is interesting, but from an economics and a feasibility perspective, it's a little. We've decided that the Earth elevator, as designed, is probably a better path.
Right on. Candice Marie says, so what are your thoughts on star seeds and proof of extraterrestrials? I have been able to channel through meditation. Any sources? What do you guys know about ETs? Anything?
No,
got nothing?
I got nothing.
No, I got
nothing.
I got nothing.
All right. That's all right. I had to ask.
Take a look.
What you got, Michael?
Some of the work that Dyson. Dyson was looking at Freeman Dyson. Sorry, Freeman Dyson was looking at not inbound extraterrestrials, but as humanity moving out as extraterrestrials. Dyson's got some pretty amazing ideas of how humanity can seed not just the solar system, but the whole of the galaxy.
So we are, in fact, the future star seeds, in essence.
I think we might be.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Michelle says, great guests, Adam. I feel my IQ went up a couple points listening tonight. Thank you. I feel the same. I have learned a lot tonight, and these two gentlemen have enlightened me a lot. And hopefully it's spread out to whoever was watching. Bringer of the D says, how do we mitigate Operation British? I don't know what that is. Do you guys, know what Operation British is?
Operation British? Sorry.
I don't know what it is. Sorry, Bringer. Fractal says, ask him how far off we are from harvesting precious metals from asteroids by deorbiting them. We already proved we can land on them.
Right.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, so, right now, unfortunately, we had 3 asteroid mining companies in the U.S., partially because there wasn't a policy at the time favoring space resources and trying to proactively develop this with government support. 2 of them, have been, they both survive in some way, being acquired, but they are refocused on other things. The last, hasn't really given us a timeline. China does have a program to try to bring an asteroid, small one, back to Earth in the mid-2020s. And of course, they're going to be testing this year with Chang'e 5, collecting lunar samples and returning that, to Earth. So, even if, China or, some stealth startup, in the United States or elsewhere starts now, probably, you're a good 10 years, from, the initial exploration and testing of stuff, and for this to actually return a profit, I kind of guess the earliest that I would be comfortable betting on it would be 20 years from now. But in theory, there mature ideas for how you would robotically access this, how you would separate out what you want, and certainly we can 3D print blunt bodies, that could come in. Whether or not that the metals themselves are economic, is a huge question. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is that, for instance, when the Europeans came to the New World, the initial thought was that the wealth was going to be bringing wealth back from the New World, whether that be gold or timber or furs. But the wealth of the New World was actually the infrastructure and the markets that were created in the New World itself. And it's the same in space, right? What you do with asteroid or lunar materials, it isn't that the big opportunity, right? Not to say there's not some opportunity that we wouldn't benefit from bringing platinum group metals back to Earth. But
Yeah.
the bigger opportunity is what that enables you to build in space so that you
Right.
never have industry on Earth at all.
Yeah, instead of having to bring all the materials to Liftport, for example, we could bring deorbit an asteroid and bring it over there and just mine it and build directly off of the materials that we get from the asteroid that we bring right to it. That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
just
So, for
hovering
instance,
around it.
why have server farms on Earth at all?
Right.
Exactly.
Why not have as much computation in space? Why build energy plants on Earth? At all? There's so many potential services and functions that you could do, in space, and minor ones too, like glowing retinas and hearts and zero G that companies are already working on now.
Wow.
I want to reframe your viewers' question though. Look at the moon. Just look out with your naked eye, and you can see all those pockmarks, right?
Yeah.
Those are asteroid impacts. So I'm going to say that we're going to start mining asteroids on the moon.
Right.
Very, very soon.
Will have been metallic asteroids, and there will be some concentrated residue that you can exploit somewhere. But to do that, of course, you've got to stop doing science missions and you've got to start doing serious resource
Mining.
prospecting.
Yeah, right. Excellent. So we got Edud says, I love the topic of tonight's show, but I believe you would have had more viewers if you included the topics in the title, such as space elevator or space-based wireless solar array. Great job. And Space Race 2025. That's a really good point. I didn't really know what this was going to be. I knew it was going to be an interview with Michael Laine, and it ended up being an incredible conversation about the future of a lot of different space technologies that we're going to be talking about. So I didn't even really know we were going to go so deep into the wireless solar arrays, which is really incredible. But I actually will change the title moving forward because this is going to remain public for people to watch for forever on YouTube. Golden Challenger said, "Oh, do you want to add something?"
Yeah, I mean, I want to say I'm going to try to have more shows like this. That we bring in really smart folks that have years, decades of experience in some of these areas where we can have these kind of conversations.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to those.
Don't you guys have an upcoming, talk with some pretty exciting discussion about the versus down the blue versus brown water school for the Space Force?
Well, I was gonna finish the super chats, and then I was gonna let Michael kind of rap about the future of basically next week. We got a lot of cool things coming up. Let me just finish. We only have 3 more super chats here, and then we'll get into that. Golden Challenger says, "What could stop people from having babies in space?" And I guess I'm gonna jump in. It's the unknown. We don't know what lack of gravity. If you've watched, Scott Kelly was in space for a year, and his bones stretched. He grew, I think, an inch and a half, or maybe just a little over an inch. And then being back on Earth, he shrank, and he said he was feeling the stress of the gravity back on his bones. So we grow in gravity, and that's what we're used to. I mean, this is just me making assumptions. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, there are several things, right? First of all, we don't know how well we're going to be able to shield from various types of radiation. So
good point.
That's the question. Then we exist in a magnetic field, right? And
also
so
true.
Don't know, what level. We don't know how important that is, right? And we don't know how easily that could be mitigated artificially with artificial magnetic fields.
Good point.
But gravity is the big one, right? And we don't know, we really don't know anything about this. We don't know, for instance, we know microgravity on the International Space Station is very bad for humans, but we've never tried to do mammal, well, maybe there has been something to do with mice. In fact, I think China just tried to do some mouse reproduction, but that's been very problematic. They were, I think, they succeeded, but you have a lot of false starts. So we know that microgravity makes things very hard, but we don't know how much gravity. We don't know if a tenth, a hundredth, a sixth, like on the moon, half, or what you might have on Mars. We don't know what is enough. And then the other thing we actually don't know is rotational fake gravity like you'd have, in a torus, in a spinning like in 2001, or in an O'Neill cylinder, right? Is that enough light gravity on the body, that it ends up, can you go ahead and carry a baby to term? Does it develop normally? We just don't know. And, it's going to be hard for us in the West to sort of find this out, because
Right.
we take a dim view of irresponsible, actions. So this might actually be one of those areas where we're likely to get behind, because another society bent on settlement, of which, there's certainly one already, they're likely to just try it, for the heroes of the nation, to see what you can and can't do.
Excellent. Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm everything that Pete just said was good. I'm gonna I'll shift a little bit, because just the act of sex is a gravitational act.
Yeah,
just the act of the spermies moving around, there's gravity involved there. So there may be a possibility of in vitro work. But if we ever kind of have a normal human society in space, I don't think I want to partner using bungee cords to connect people, right? Like that's there. So I don't mean to be crude about this, but
no, that's okay.
There's just a lot that we don't know.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, thank you. DJ Ronnie again says, how do we protect our cities from colony drops? For example, bad guys deciding to deorbit O'Neill cylinders. Well, first off, I was under the impression that these O'Neill cylinders wouldn't even be in like Earth's orbit. I mean, I don't actually know. Like, would they be in orbit, or would they be out, further out? I don't want to say interstellar, because that's past our solar system, but more, past the moon. I don't know exactly where they would actually be stationed at.
So, the typical place where people have talked about putting these, because they're really heavy and it's actually really hard to change their position. So you want them in places where you have to expend, next to zero energy to maintain, where they're at. Are these L4 and L5 that are
right.
And so changing something, that massive, would be hard, and it would be, seen. And we've got to get there first before we can worry about that sort of problem.
Good point.
And in truth, we already have to worry about that problem now from nature it's constantly trying to drop rocks on our heads.
Yeah, good point.
But once you start putting infrastructure up in space, it matters that you've got folks that are policing that area, that are making sure that actors are behaving the way they should be. And that's part of, as the Space Force expands, today it basically provides missile warning, overhead pictures and signals intelligence. It provides, your GPS signal, and it provides military communication. But, as you see people like Michael and companies starting to build and have American citizens and American economic interests in space, you can anticipate that all the same things you expect on the sea, search and rescue, salvage, clearing the harbor of dangerous things, maintaining safety of navigation, stopping people who are carrying illicit goods, doing basic law enforcement, making sure that people aren't, doing things that they shouldn't do. That type of thing is going to, necessarily, expand in roles and missions. And if we're going to be there and be ready when Michael and the rest of the team is going to need it, we have to start thinking about that now.
Right. All right. St. Miles says, have they heard of the Gateway Foundation, and does it seem achievable? Have you guys heard of the Gateway Foundation?
Yeah, so Gateway Foundation wants to build this very large rotational, space station similar to
Elysium?
2001. And they're not the
Okay.
only. There are other companies out there that want to do large rotational, space stations.
Okay.
It isn't the question of the physics. The physics goes back to what NASA had originally wanted in their space station, and what that movie 2001. Really was the best technical experts at the time, and what they thought would actually be possible by 2001. And of course, unfortunately, we undershot what was technically possible because we changed our energies, basically where we were looking at things. It's certainly not that we couldn't have done all those things on the timeline that they specified. We just lacked the ambition and the mobilization of resources to do it. So Gateway Foundation, the design is something that I think could be built. It's just a question of how much capital, are they able to get in order to do it? They can get investors. You probably can do it. Like anything of that size, in low Earth orbit,
pretty huge.
Get tolerant, expecting that, some level of space debris is going to be a problem. And space debris deorbit is another thing that, just like, a Navy may, either do it itself or contract out to dredge a harbor. Sooner or later, we're going to have to get serious about actively deorbiting space debris.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to add something, Michael?
Go ahead. Yeah. So I confess I didn't know that system, but I do want to point out that big ambitious projects like mine, like theirs, like space-based solar power, like nuclear propulsion, all of these space station ideas. Let's say they all fail, right? They put X number of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into them, and they all fail. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
We still, as humanity, have benefited because it is an idea factory that will generate patent after patent after patent after patent. And investors that put all of these big dollars in will require a return on their investment. And the only way that's going to happen, if all of these ideas fail, is to get these big ideas into the public sector and actually try to get a return on investment based on licensing, and our team tried making something really, really strong, and we failed. Okay, but we did wind up with something that was really electrically conductive, and it was a pretty interesting material. Behind me, I moved because of the sun earlier, but I've got a whole bunch of robots over on that shelf there, and the act of creating these robots, even though some of them succeeded and some of them failed, we came up with a bunch of intellectual property that's valuable whether the elevator gets built or not. And so I see ideas like Gateway, and it's easy to discount them, right? They've got all these really pretty pictures. Somebody's obviously brilliant at models, creating models, digital models. But at the end, failed projects like Mars One a couple of years ago, even if they all fail, everything that we've been talking about today, they still inspire, they still generate technology, and that technology ultimately becomes valuable, whether the original idea was valuable or not. So I love seeing stuff like Gateway. I'm going to look that up. I didn't know about them. But I love that success or failure, humanity moves forward.
That's kind of the way we've done things, right?
Yeah.
Try until you succeed.
Yeah.
And in fact, you can see that, like what SpaceX has been able to do, right, is built upon, past failures, unreasonable launch, their early successes like DCX, rockets, that were developed, rocket engines in NASA that were then transitioned, to the private sector, other computational tools. So, we're not talking about an individual company. We're talking about an ecosystem and really a brand new social movement, right? A social movement that didn't exist. And that's one of the big things about the new space age is the old space age was entirely about states. States were the actors, and really just two states were the actors.
Yeah.
Today you've got two companies that probably have got the capabilities that only superpowers had at one time, and you've got a multiplicity of states. You've got China coming, right behind them is India, Russia, then Nigeria, the African space, and you've got Japan. Sooner or later, you have other countries get UAE, Saudi Arabia are looking to
Israel, UAE. They both, we have 3 missions on Mars right now. 3 missions on their way to Mars right now. 2
I didn't know that.
Yeah, United States, China, and UAE. United Arab Emirates. Look, talk about wild card. I said that a while ago. I would argue that United Arab Emirates has the strongest Martian program, and I know that sounds like blasphemy to my NASA friends, but their program to go to Mars is rock solid. United
Arab thing is right. Their goal is to have a city, with a large number of people on Mars by, I forget, 21 something. Right? They're getting
right. This is their year anniversary. And
this is the tiny ambition of NASA, right? To go circle it, or maybe land it one day, right?
Yeah.
This is a real ambition. Like, this is a real nation-state level ambition that's worthy of a country. Well, put a city on the planet.
Oh man, I really would love to dig into this, but I only have 2 more. We are way over time. I'm sorry, guys. I have to cut you off here. We only have 2 more. I have another question that I want you guys to answer. Has Salvatore Passi's patent electro field generator for deflecting asteroids been tested? It was signed off by the Secretary of the Navy. Do you guys know about this? The electrostatic field generator.
So I don't. So no? I do know that now. Well, I'm sorry that I'm not familiar with that exact patent. I know a lot about what is being tested or about to be tested for asteroid defense, and basically nothing has been tested on an asteroid. We're about to do our first kinetic impact on Didymoon, in this upcoming DART mission, which is very exciting. First time that we're ever going to physically, move and measure an asteroid. Now on electrostatics, though, I am aware that NASA is working on an electrostatic sail that essentially captures the solar wind. Can accelerate really fast. Like, you can scream out of the solar system with an electrostatic sail. In some cases, it looks better than what you can do with just a pure solar sail.
Awesome.
So, there is a really interesting technology related to electrostatics. And if we have more time, there are a lot of really interesting ideas for interstellar and deep space transportation.
I'm sure there's so much stuff that you two know about that we could probably go on forever about. And this final question is from TY Sticks. And this kind of actually goes perfect for Michael to start say what we're going to talk about next week. Ask about next-gen rocket propulsion tech, please. So we're going to be talking about that next Wednesday, right? So you actually have some interesting guests that, like you actually mentioned him earlier. He can get to Mars in 37 days, right? Is that?
Yeah, he's not scheduled next
incredibly impressive. Oh, okay, next Saturday.
I think it's like 2 weeks from now. We got to confirm schedules, but
okay, sure.
I'm going to try and bring in a couple folks that are really, really looking at how do we get from here to there, right? There's there's a couple folks I'm going to try and bring in that are talking about infrastructure, point-to-point suborbital rocketry, how to get to Mars smart, not just fast, but smart. So there's a couple things we're going to look at. Schedules permitting in October. So pretty fun stuff. Next week, like Wednesday, we're going to talk a lot about a little bit more about Space Force. We're going to talk about China. We're going to and the what specifically with facts China is doing right now, out in
that.
space. We're gonna dive into space theory and development from a national perspective, from a global perspective, and then the week after that, next Saturday.
Yeah, tell us what's happening Saturday. This is actually what brought us together, basically.
Right, it really is. So it was kind of funny.
Michael, can I before you tease everybody with next? Can I jump in a little bit on the next generation rockets?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please do.
All right, so this has been a long-term interest of mine, back when I was an Air Force officer doing future planning. So, basically, you can think about the future of rockets in some big buckets, right? The first one is just the ability to refuel. Once you can refuel in space, incredible things open up, even with boring old, LOX hydrogen or LOX methane rockets. Entirely new scales become possible if you're just reusable and refuelable. The next thing is...
Wait, are you saying that, you could use a rocket and, say, land on an asteroid or pull up to an asteroid, mine it, and refuel from that? Or what do you mean?
No, first, what Starship aims to do is to put a Starship in orbit and then launch 5 times to refuel it in low Earth orbit and be able to send it fully laden all the way to Mars. And then on Mars, you've got, probably a nuclear reactor, suck it in the atmosphere, creating, methane for the return trip.
Right.
The same thing on the moon. You go to the moon, you get the water, you have miners that get the water, turn it into, slush, hydrogen and oxygen. And then, you're able to come back and forth to lunar orbit and to the Earth, much cheaper, because you've got all these great lakes of ice on the north and south pole of the moon.
Nice.
But then, beyond chemical rockets, you've got, nuclear rockets are about twice the efficiency, and they're basically, you can think of them like your iron at home, right? They just get really, really hot, and you pass a gas over them. They're much simpler than regular rockets, but they're like twice the efficiency of regular rockets. And very excitingly right now, we have embryonic programs for the first time in decades at both NASA and DARPA. DARPA has demonstration Agile cislunar, rocket Draco, and there's strong support from this administration to move in that direction. And then there's interest in fission, which powers electric engines. And then on the horizon, you've got pulse detonation things like Mini-Mag Orion that actually could scale to going interstellar. And then you've got really interesting novel fusion concepts that really could potentially give you something very much like you see in The Expanse, where you've got regular long-term acceleration, which is also very exciting. So their rockets have a long way to go before we have exhausted what is possible with just ejecting mass out the back, and nuclear is really one of the big next evolutions. And we've got to be on top of our game, because China has announced that they want to have a fleet of nuclear shuttles in the 2040 timeframe to do massive scale asteroid mining and settlement. And Russia's also got plans for a megawatt class nuclear reactor that they want to beat everybody to the punch. So nuclear is back in the game in terms of a space race.
Wow, interesting. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. My goodness. Very exciting stuff. Because, I mean, that's part of the future is where we're going to get the energy, where are we going to fuel this stuff. So very cool. So, Michael, tell us about what's happening this Saturday.
So there's this conversation, I'd say it's a debate. If you can imagine, in the Navy, there's this concept of blue water, which is deep sea. It's aircraft carriers, it's force projection, hundreds of miles, even thousands of miles outside of that little nexus of an aircraft carrier. That's one piece of the Navy. And another piece of the Navy is the near shore. They call that brown water Navy. As a former Marine, I was a part of that part of the Navy. And they've taken this idea, blue water versus brown, and they have, in the Pentagon right now, they're having a conversation, taking the same analogy. I think it's kind of a clumsy analogy, but that's what they got right now. And they're saying, okay, if low Earth orbit, mid-Earth orbit, and geosynchronous orbit, that's near Earth, so that's brown water. And then the stuff that I really like cislunar environment, the moon, Mars, and asteroids, that's blue water, right? There's this constant, or there's this conversation at the Pentagon right now about where to prioritize, how to prioritize. And these are really, really important conversations that have ripple effects around the world. And so our company is hosting a conversation that's going to look at these problems. And we've got some pretty interesting folks, some of whom we can't quite yet announce, but we have at least one 3-star general, maybe a 2-star general, maybe a 1-star general, and the president of International Space University, all coming together to look at this really important conversation. And so we're going to be hosting that next Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we did that specifically so that folks in Europe and Asia can be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
So we'd love to have any of your folks come and join us. We've got a link on our website. It's at liftport.com. What's that?
What is your website?
So liftport.com, and it's in the events section on the 26th. It's called Better Futures, A Future of Space. That's the name of the event. And we'd really love to have your viewers, show up and chime in. And we've got some folks they're going to specifically detailed to answer any of their questions while this conversation's going on. And I think it's going to be, if you liked what we did here today, you're going to like what we're talking about in a couple days. And then that Saturday night, that Saturday night, back on your show, Adam, thank you for having us. I'm calling it kind of the after party, right?
I like that. I see that. That's great. Right. I like it.
So the event in the morning is going to be kind of formal, right? Because we've got these, fairly serious people talking about something really important, and then afterwards, we're all going to get together and kind of to rap about, how it went and what we thought about it. So it should be kind of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I'm really excited about it because I love this stuff. And seriously, you know what? Thank you both. Peter, it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your insight. And Michael, it was a pleasure to have you on. I know we've been chatting a few times over the past couple of weeks, and it's been a great episode. I know we went over 50 minutes, but that's okay. We had to answer the questions, and honestly, I have more questions now for next time. So, so is this your tag at Garretson Peter? Okay, so is that your Twitter handle?
That's my Twitter.
So you can find Peter at Garretson Peter. Michael, yours just at Michael Laine, I believe, right?
No, I would go to at Liftport. At Liftport.
At Liftport. So you can find.
I would change it. I don't know how to change my tab, but it's just at Liftport.
I can change it for you.
Okay.
I'll just do at Liftport. There we go. So you can find him at Liftport. That's easy.
Right on.
And really, that was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate all of you for hanging out. This is going to continue next Wednesday. Michael's going to bring some more experts on. We're going to be discussing more stuff. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. You can find me at Adam Crigler, also on Parler, Instagram, Facebook. I tend to check, but if you really have any questions, show up. And I do try to pay attention to chat, but it's quite hard when we're having a deep conversation about this kind of stuff. But I'm really looking forward to Wednesday, and then of course next Saturday that you heard about. Basically, it's the future of space. We're going to be talking about really where we're headed, and it's really exciting stuff. So thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam.